I am Jocelyn, 33 years old, and my wedding day was supposed to be a celebration of love and new beginnings. Instead, it became the exact moment my toxic family decided to execute their final betrayal. I received a text message from my stepbrother firing me from the company I helped build, calling my termination his personal wedding gift to me. I just showed that cruel message to my new husband, who simply smiled and raised his glass. 9 hours later, my phone exploded with 308 missed calls. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who grossly underestimated your worth. The reception was held at a beautiful botanical garden on the outskirts of the city. The evening air was warm, the string quartet was playing softly in the background, and I was sitting at the sweetheart table next to Donovan. Donovan is an incredible man. He is a brilliant African-American man who carries himself with a quiet, grounding confidence. To my family, he was just a freelance consultant who wore modest, unbranded suits and drove a 5-year-old sedan. They had no idea who he really was, and Donovan preferred it that way. We were just finishing our first course when my phone vibrated against the silk tablecloth. I normally would never check my phone during my own wedding reception, but the notification flashed with an urgent priority tag from the corporate network at Apex Freight. I swiped the screen open. The message was from Trent, my spoiled 28-year-old stepbrother. Trent had just been appointed co-CEO of the logistics company by my stepfather Warren. The text message glared back at me. "You are fired. System access revoked. Your keycard is deactivated. Consider it my wedding gift to you, you glorified dispatcher. Enjoy your honeymoon on a budget." I stared at the glowing screen. For a decade, I had worked as the supply chain strategist for Apex Freight. I had designed the entire routing architecture that allowed Warren to expand his fleet from 50 trucks to over 400. I was the brain behind the operation, yet they still viewed me as the obedient stepdaughter they could discard whenever it suited them. Before I could even process the audacity of Trent sending that message during my reception, two figures loomed over our table. It was my biological younger sister Chelsea and her husband Jamal. Chelsea had always been my mother Beverly's golden child, the one who received the lavish praise and the trust fund while I was handed chores and expectations. Jamal, an African-American man with a penchant for flashy logo-covered designer clothes, worked as a regional sales director under Trent. He was a notorious sycophant who spent his days flattering my stepfather and stepbrother to secure his quarterly bonuses. Jamal did not offer congratulations. He leaned over the table, swirling his expensive whiskey, and sneered at Donovan. He looked Donovan up and down, his eyes lingering on Donovan's perfectly tailored but label-free charcoal suit. "Nice suit," Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you rent it for the weekend? You know, if you ever want to step up from doing freelance gigs and get a real corporate job, let me know." Trent just gave me a massive promotion today. I am running the entire East Coast division now. We always need guys in the warehouse. Donovan did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply took a slow sip of his sparkling water, looked Jamal dead in the eye, and smiled. "I appreciate the offer, Jamal, but I think I am exactly where I need to be." Chelsea placed a manicured hand on the table, her diamond rings catching the light. She smirked at me, leaning down so only the four of us could hear. "I saw you looking at your phone, Jocelyn. Do not cause a scene and ruin the aesthetic of the evening. Mom told me everything. Warren needed to clear your salary space to make room for Trent's new executive team. You have to admit, keeping you on payroll was just a charity case anyway. You have always been the stepping stone for this family. Just accept it gracefully." The sheer malice in her voice was breathtaking. My mother Beverly had known about this. She had allowed Warren and Trent to terminate my employment on the very day I was getting married, simply to consolidate their power and hand my hard-earned salary over to Trent's cronies like Jamal. They genuinely believed I was powerless. They thought without Apex Freight I was nothing. I looked at Chelsea's gloating face, then at Jamal's arrogant posture. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw my champagne in their faces. Instead, I reached down and picked up my phone. I calmly opened the settings, wiped my work profile entirely, and powered the device down. I turned to Donovan and slid the dark phone across the table. He already knew about the underlying architecture of my work. He looked at the blank screen, then looked up at Chelsea and Jamal with an expression of calm amusement. Donovan picked up his champagne flute and turned to me. "Shall we begin the countdown, my love?" I raised my glass, tapping it gently against his. "Let the countdown begin." We stood up from the table, completely ignoring the confused expressions on Chelsea and Jamal's faces. We left our own wedding reception early, stepping into a waiting town car that whisked us away to the airport. We were heading to the Maldives for a 2-week honeymoon. I left my phone turned off for the entire flight, knowing perfectly well that the bomb I had unknowingly armed was about to detonate right under my stepfather's desk. The journey to the Maldives was a sanctuary of peace. Donovan and I spent the flights talking about our future, entirely disconnected from the corporate toxicity of Apex Freight. When we finally arrived at our overwater bungalow, the turquoise ocean stretched out endlessly before us. The warm, tropical breeze carried the scent of salt and orchids. It was paradise, but I knew the real world was waiting for me inside my luggage. I unpacked my bags, retrieved my phone, and plugged it into the charger. The moment the device connected to the international cellular network and caught the local Wi-Fi, it began to vibrate violently. It did not stop buzzing for a full 2 minutes. Notifications flooded the screen in an endless cascade of digital panic. I had 308 missed calls. There were 90 calls from Trent. There were over 100 from Warren. There were dozens from Jamal, Chelsea, and my mother. The rest were frantic dials from the Apex Freight IT department. I opened my voicemail inbox, which was completely full. I tapped the most recent message from Trent and put it on speaker so Donovan could hear it while he unpacked his suit bag. Trent's voice echoed through the luxurious suite. He was not just yelling, he was screeching. "Jocelyn, pick up the phone right now. What did you do to the routing servers? The entire logistics grid is completely locked. 400 trucks are grounded at distribution centers across the country. The drivers cannot get their manifests. The warehouse scanners are completely frozen. Call me back immediately or I am calling the police." I took a slow, deliberate breath, walked out onto the wooden deck of our bungalow and stared at the crystal clear water. Just as the voicemail ended, an incoming call lit up the screen. It was Trent again. This would be call number 309. I swiped the green button and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello, Trent." "Jocelyn!" Trent screamed so loudly the phone speaker crackled. "Fix this right now, you malicious, vindictive hacker. I have the authorities on the other line. I am having you arrested for corporate sabotage. You locked us out of our own system. Turn it back on." I walked over to the deck chair, sat down, and took a sip of the complimentary fruit cocktail the resort staff had left for us. "Trent, you need to lower your voice and listen very carefully to what I am about to say. I did not hack anything. I did not sabotage the company. I simply let the system function exactly as it was legally designed to function." "What are you talking about?" Trent demanded, his breathing heavy and erratic. "The software is demanding an administrative override that only you have. Give me the password." "Trent," I said, my voice echoing the serene calm of the ocean in front of me. "I am a supply chain strategist. When I built that routing algorithm, I did not build it as an employee of Apex Freight. I built it under my own private limited liability company. I own the intellectual property. Apex Freight merely licenses that software from my company." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. The realization had not quite hit him yet, so I spelled it out for him with absolute precision. "The licensing agreement was tied directly to my employment credentials," I explained. "It was a security measure to ensure the proprietary code was never stolen or misused by unauthorized personnel. By firing me via text message and instructing IT to revoke my system access and deactivate my credentials, you triggered the automated security kill switch. The software recognized that the authorized administrator was forcibly removed from the network. It did exactly what it was programmed to do. It pulled the license and locked down to protect the source code." "You locked yourself out, Trent." I could hear frantic whispering on the other end of the line. Trent was clearly not alone. The staggering weight of his own incompetence was finally settling in. He had fired the one person holding the keys to the entire operation entirely out of spite, without ever understanding how the company's technical infrastructure actually worked. Before Trent could respond, there was a scuffling sound, and then a new booming voice took over the line. It was Warren, my stepfather. His tone was laced with the familiar, arrogant intimidation he used to bully everyone in his life. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat," Warren snarled. "I do not care what kind of technical games you think you are playing. I own Apex Freight. I paid your salary for a decade. Everything you built on company time belongs to me. You are going to log into that server from wherever you are, and you are going to restore the routing matrix immediately. If you do not, I will unleash a team of corporate lawyers on you so fast your head will spin. I will sue you for every penny you have. I will bury you in litigation until you are bankrupt and homeless." I looked back into the suite. Donovan was standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the doorframe. He had heard every word. His expression was completely unreadable, a cool, dangerous calm that made him incredible at his job. He nodded at me, a silent gesture to hold my ground. "Warren," I said, my voice dropping to a low, authoritative register, "I suggest you consult your own legal department before making threats you cannot back up. You drained my college fund years ago to bail Trent out of his first failed business venture. I paid for my own education. I built my LLC on my own time with my own equipment. You have absolutely zero legal claim to my intellectual property. You made Trent your co-CEO, so let him manage the crisis. Have a wonderful day." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the cushion beside me. The quiet of the Maldives rushed back in, replacing the toxic noise of my family. Donovan walked over, picked up my phone, and turned it completely off again. He handed me a glass of champagne and kissed my forehead. "Let them bleed," Donovan said quietly. "They have not even begun to feel the pain yet." Donovan and I spent the next hour walking along the white sand beach of our private island resort. The Indian Ocean lapped gently at our feet, a stark contrast to the absolute chaos I knew was unfolding back in New York. We returned to our overwater bungalow just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. I walked over to the nightstand and powered my phone back on. I needed to access my private server dashboard to monitor the automated defense protocols of my software. The moment the screen lit up, a call bypassed my usual filters. It was a direct line from my mother, Beverly. I stared at the caller identification, a heavy weight settling in my chest. For a brief second, the naive, hopeful part of me wondered if she was calling to apologize. Perhaps she wanted to congratulate me on my wedding, to ask about my honeymoon, or to check if I was all right after Trent had so viciously fired me during my own reception. Against my better judgment, I answered the call. "Jocelyn, log into your computer this instant and fix the routing servers." My mother did not even say hello. Her voice was shrill, vibrating with a frantic energy that immediately put me on edge. There was no mention of my wedding, no inquiry about my flight, no trace of maternal warmth. "Warren is absolutely furious with you. You are ruining your brother's first day as co-CEO. Give them the administrative passwords immediately." I gripped the edge of the mahogany desk in our suite. The sheer audacity of her demand momentarily robbed me of my breath. "Mom, I just got married yesterday. I am on my honeymoon on the other side of the world." Trent fired me via text message while I was sitting at my sweetheart table. Did you really think I would just hand over my intellectual property because Warren threw a temper tantrum? "Stop being so dramatic, Jocelyn." Beverly snapped, her tone dripping with the familiar condescension she had used to control me my entire life. "Trent made a rash administrative decision, yes, but he is under a lot of pressure stepping into this new executive role. You know how stressful the logistics industry is. You are purposefully sabotaging his big moment out of petty jealousy. Now stop acting like a spoiled child, open your laptop and send Trent the unlock codes. He has 400 freight trucks sitting idle and clients are threatening to cancel their contracts. You are hurting the family business." "It is not my family business," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm register. "I am just a disposable employee, remember? That is what Warren called me. But since we are talking about family support, let us talk about my college fund. Let us talk about the $50,000 my biological father left for my education. The money you and Warren drained behind my back 10 years ago to bail out Trent's first failed tech startup. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. I had never confronted her about the stolen money before. I had discovered the emptied accounts during my freshman year and ended up taking out predatory student loans to cover my tuition. I worked 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, while Trent drove a luxury sports car bought with my father's money. That was a family emergency, Beverly hissed, immediately shifting into defense mode. Warren provided a roof over your head for years. We fed you, we clothed you, we gave you a place in high society. Trent needed that seed money, and Warren promised he would pay it back once the business took off. You know Trent has an entrepreneurial spirit. We had to support him. He bankrupted that startup in 6 months, paying for VIP club tables and private jets. I shot back the years of suppressed anger, finally breaking through my polite facade, and Warren never paid back a single dime. I built my supply chain software from scratch, working nights and weekends in a cramped studio apartment while I paid off my student loans. That software belongs to my private LLC. Apex Freight has been using it on a licensed basis. When Trent terminated my employment and revoked my network credentials, the system automatically protected its source code. I owe Warren nothing. I owe Trent nothing. And I certainly owe you nothing. You listen to me right now, Jocelyn? Beverly's voice turned incredibly cold, shedding any remaining pretense of maternal affection. You have always been a selfish, ungrateful daughter. Chelsea never treats us this way. Chelsea knows the value of family loyalty. Jamal is working tirelessly for Warren, trying to build a future for your sister, and you are putting his commissions at risk with your stubbornness. If you do not send those passwords to Warren in the next 5 minutes, you are done. I will cut you off entirely. Do not bother showing up for Thanksgiving. Do not call me on my birthday. You will be dead to this family. I looked across the hotel suite. Donovan was sitting on the edge of the bed watching me with quiet, unwavering support. He gave me a single affirming nod. I realized then that my mother's threat was not a punishment. It was a release. You cut me off the day you let Warren steal my future to fund his son's ego. I said, my voice completely steady. Consider the passwords my final goodbye. Have a nice life, Beverly. I ended the call. My hand was shaking slightly, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had finally done it. I had severed the toxic tie that had bound me to their manipulation for my entire life. I set the phone face down on the desk, exhaling a long, shaky breath. Donovan stood up, walked over, and pulled me into a tight, comforting embrace. You handled that perfectly, he murmured against my hair. You never have to shrink yourself for them ever again. I leaned into his warmth, feeling a profound sense of liberation washing over me. But the peace of the Maldives was fragile, and the people I had just declared war against were not the type to accept defeat gracefully. Warren possessed vast financial resources, and Trent possessed a desperate, reckless ego. A sharp ding from my phone broke the silence in the room. I pulled away from Donovan and picked up the device. It was a text message from Jamal, my brother-in-law. There was no text, just an image file attached. I tapped the screen to load the picture. It was a photograph of the front door of my modest apartment back in the United States. Taped directly to the center of the door was a thick manila envelope bearing the official seal of the state court. Zooming in on the high-resolution image, I could clearly read the bold black letters printed across the front of the document. It was a formal legal summons. Warren was suing me for corporate sabotage, breach of contract, and intentional interference with business relations. The war had officially begun. The image of the legal summons glared from my phone screen, the harsh reality of Warren's threat sinking in. I stared at the photo Jamal had sent, my mind racing through the legal implications. They were actually suing me for corporate sabotage. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. Donovan gently took the phone from my grip, his eyes scanning the image. He did not look worried. He looked analytical, like a grandmaster examining a chessboard. Let them waste their billable hours drafting baseless lawsuits, Donovan said, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of my anxiety. A summons taped to a door is an intimidation tactic, Jocelyn. It is designed to make you panic and surrender your intellectual property. They have no legal standing, and Warren knows it. I wanted to believe him, but the relentless pinging of my phone signaled a new wave of attacks. My email inbox began filling with urgent messages, not from Apex Freight, but from my secondary freelance clients. These were the independent contracts I had spent years cultivating, the safety net I had built to ensure I would never be entirely dependent on Warren's company. I opened an email from Marcus, the operations director of a regional supply chain network in the Midwest. Jocelyn, we need to immediately pause our consulting contract. I am sorry, but the board saw the article on Logistics Insider this morning. We cannot be associated with this kind of liability right now. My blood ran cold. Article 1 quickly opened my web browser and navigated to Logistics Insider, the most widely read trade publication in our industry. There, splashed across the front page, was a headline that made my stomach churn. Disgruntled ex-employee sabotages major logistics firm on her wedding day. I clicked the link, my eyes scanning the fabricated story. The article quoted an anonymous senior executive at Apex Freight, clearly Trent, detailing a malicious cyber attack executed by a former supply chain strategist. The narrative painted me as an unstable, vindictive woman who, upon being terminated for poor performance, deliberately crashed the routing servers out of spite, holding a multi-million-dollar corporation hostage. The article claimed my actions were currently under federal investigation. It was a complete character assassination. Trent had weaponized the media against me, using the company's PR budget to destroy my professional reputation. He knew he could not beat me legally, so he was trying to starve me out financially. Before I could even process the full extent of the damage, another text message arrived from Trent. Sign over the intellectual property for free, or you will never work in this industry again. I have reporters from 2 other trade magazines waiting for my call. I can make this much worse for you, Jocelyn. Be smart. Surrender the software. I dropped the phone onto the bed. The weight of their coordinated attack felt suffocating. They were systematically dismantling my life, my reputation, and my livelihood, all while I was supposed to be celebrating my marriage. I had spent a decade building my name in this industry, earning every ounce of respect through relentless hard work. Trent was destroying it all with a few well-placed lies and a PR budget funded by my own stolen college fund. Donovan picked up the phone again. He read the article on Logistics Insider in complete silence. Then he read the emails from my canceled clients. Finally, he read Trent's extortion text. I watched Donovan closely. The warm, supportive husband I had married just 48 hours ago vanished. In his place stood a man I did not entirely recognize. His posture shifted, straightening into an imposing stance of absolute authority. The soft lines around his eyes hardened into glacial ice. He emanated a quiet, terrifying power. He pulled his own phone from his pocket. It was a sleek, encrypted device I rarely saw him use. He dialed a number from memory and raised the phone to his ear. When he spoke, his voice was devoid of any emotion, operating on a level of pure, ruthless calculation. Marcus, Donovan said, bypassing any greeting. I need an immediate acceleration on the Apex Freight debt covenants. Yes, the Montgomery portfolio. Pull the trigger on the key person clause violation. I want a full forensic audit initiated on their regional sales accounts, specifically focusing on the East Coast division managed by Jamal. Freeze their secondary credit facilities. Route everything through the senior partners. No extensions. No grace periods. I sat on the edge of the bed, stunned. I had no idea what Donovan was talking about. Debt covenants. Forensic audits. This was the high-level financial jargon of Wall Street predators, not the language of a freelance consultant. Donovan listened for a moment, his jaw clenched tight. I do not care if it forces them into insolvency by Friday, he commanded. They triggered the default when they terminated the strategist without board approval. Prepare the asset seizure documentation. I will be in the boardroom by Monday morning to execute the hostile takeover. Send the jet to mail. We are leaving tonight. He hung up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. The silence in the overwater bungalow was deafening, save for the gentle lapping of the waves against the wooden stilts. I stared at him, my mind struggling to bridge the gap between the man I loved and the corporate titan who had just ordered the destruction of my stepfather's company. Donovan looked down at me, the glacial ice in his eyes melting back into deep, fierce affection. He reached out and gently cupped my face. "Pack your bags, my love," Donovan said, his voice smooth and incredibly dangerous. "We are going back to New York. It is time to collect." I did not ask questions. The absolute certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. Whatever Donovan actually did for a living, he had just positioned himself to strike back at Warren and Trent with a force they could not possibly comprehend. I grabbed my suitcase and began packing, a new kind of adrenaline coursing through me. I was no longer the victim of a smear campaign. I was walking into war alongside a man who clearly owned the battlefield. Section 5, 1,000 words. The flight back to New York on the private Gulfstream jet was a blur of luxury and intense preparation. Donovan spent the entire 20-hour journey reviewing complex financial dossiers and coordinating with a team of lawyers who referred to him strictly as Mr. Managing Director. I sat across from him, sipping sparkling water, piecing together the magnitude of his true identity. He was not a consultant. He was the apex predator of the venture capital world. When we landed at John F. Kennedy International Airport, the transition from the humid warmth of the Maldives to the brisk, aggressive energy of New York felt appropriately jarring. A black Escalade was waiting for us on the tarmac. We bypassed customs, entirely moving with the seamless efficiency that only immense wealth can buy. However, the moment we stepped into the arrivals terminal to coordinate with Donovan's security detail, we were ambushed. "Jocelyn!" A voice echoed sharply across the polished floor. I turned to see my sister Chelsea and her husband Jamal storming toward us. They looked completely unhinged. Jamal's usual polished arrogance was replaced by wild, sweaty desperation. He was wearing an expensive designer tracksuit that suddenly looked ridiculous against his panicked expression. Chelsea trailed behind him, clutching her luxury handbag like a weapon, her face contorted with rage. "You think you can just run away and hide after destroying my life?" Jamal shouted, closing the distance between us rapidly. Donovan stepped smoothly in front of me, a silent, immovable barrier. Two men in dark suits materialized from the shadows, Donovan's personal security standing casually but firmly between us and my furious brother-in-law. Jamal ignored the security, pointing an accusing finger directly at me. The system blackout froze the entire regional sales database. "Do you have any idea what you have done? We have missed our delivery windows for 5 major retail chains. The clients are pulling out. My quarterly commissions are gone. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, Jocelyn. Gone because you are throwing a childish tantrum over a job you did not even deserve." I stepped out from behind Donovan, standing tall. "I did not throw a tantrum, Jamal. Trent fired me. He deactivated my credentials, which revoked the software license. If your commissions are gone, you should be screaming at your incompetent co-CEO, not ambushing me at an airport." Chelsea pushed past Jamal, her eyes blazing with entitlement. "You are doing this on purpose. You have always been jealous of me and Jamal. You are jealous of our lifestyle, so you decided to wreck his career on your way out." Warren froze Mom's credit cards this morning. He told her she does not get a dime until she forces you to surrender the intellectual property. Do you know how humiliating that is for her? I looked at my biological sister, feeling absolutely nothing but pity. "Your lifestyle is built on a house of cards, Chelsea, and Mom's credit limits are not my responsibility. Tell Warren to build his own software." Jamal sneered, trying to regain his dominant posture. He puffed out his chest and glared at Donovan. "And who is going to protect you? This broke freelancer. You think this guy can afford the legal fees when Warren drags you into federal court? What is he going to do? Consult them to death. Give it up, Jocelyn. Hand over the flash drive with the source code, and I will personally talk to Trent about getting you an entry-level data management job so your new husband does not have to starve." Donovan did not raise his voice. He did not puff out his chest. He simply adjusted his cuffs, his demeanor radiating absolute terrifying control. Jamal, Donovan said smoothly, "How is that heavily leveraged mortgage on your house in the Hamptons?" Jamal froze. The aggressive sneer dropped from his face, replaced by sudden, genuine confusion. What are you talking about? You took out an adjustable rate mortgage 3 years ago, relying entirely on your projected quarterly sales commissions to cover the balloon payments. Donovan continued, his voice precise and surgical. You also took out a secondary line of credit against the property to fund your wife's boutique business, which, according to the public filings, has operated at a net loss for 6 consecutive quarters. Without your bonus this month, you will default on both loans within 45 days. The bank will foreclose on your home and you will lose everything. Chelsea turned pale, staring at her husband in horror. Jamal, what is he talking about? What secondary line of credit? Jamal's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He stared at Donovan, the realization slowly dawning that he was not speaking to a broke freelancer. He was speaking to someone who had access to his deepest, most guarded financial secrets. Who are you? Jamal managed to whisper, stepping back. I am the man who holds the debt, Donovan replied coldly. And I highly suggest you lower your voice when addressing my wife. Now get out of my way before I make a phone call and have your vehicles repossessed while you are standing in this terminal. Jamal grabbed Chelsea's arm and practically dragged her backward. Chelsea was still demanding answers about the secret loans, her shrieks echoing down the terminal corridor as they retreated. I watched them go, completely stunned by the surgical precision with which Donovan had just dismantled them. He turned back to me, offering his arm with a warm smile. Shall we go home, Mrs. Montgomery? I slipped my arm through his, feeling a surge of fierce pride. We walked out of the airport and into the waiting escalade. The smear campaign, the airport ambush, the legal threats, it was all noise. They thought they were hunting a vulnerable target, but they had just walked willingly into the lion's den. It was time for the next move. The very next morning, my phone lit up with a message from my mother. It was completely devoid of the venom she had spewed during our last phone call. Instead, she was using her sweet maternal tone, the specific voice she reserved for manipulating situations that were rapidly slipping out of her control. The message read, Jocelyn, darling, let us put an end to all this hostility. Warren is hosting a private family dinner tonight at the Connecticut estate. No lawyers, no shouting, just us. We want to find a compromise and keep the peace. Please come. I showed the message to Donovan as we sat in the sun-drenched kitchen of his Manhattan penthouse. He took one glance at the text and shook his head. It is a trap, he said, pouring me a cup of dark roast coffee. They are cornered animals trying to lure you into a controlled environment. I know it is a trap, I replied, taking a sip from my mug. But I also know Warren. He operates entirely on ego and intimidation. He needs an audience to feel powerful. If I do not show up, he will think I am hiding. I need to look him in the eye when I refuse him. Donovan smiled, a dangerous, brilliant expression that completely transformed his face. Do you want me to come with you and dismantle him tonight? I shook my head. No, let Warren think he still has the upper hand. Let him think I am completely isolated. I will handle this dinner alone. The drive to Fairfield County took just over an hour. Warren's estate was a sprawling gated mansion designed to project generational wealth, even though every brick was paid for by the sweat of his underpaid warehouse workers. I parked my rental car between Trent's flashy sports car and my mother's imported luxury SUV. The massive oak front door was unlocked, a subtle psychological trick to make me feel like I was expected yet entirely on their turf. I walked into the grand foyer, my heels clicking sharply against the imported Italian marble. The house was unnervingly quiet. There was no smell of roasted garlic or fresh bread, none of the usual warmth that accompanies a genuine family dinner. The air felt sterile and heavy with anticipation. I found them waiting in the formal dining room. The long mahogany table was set, but not with fine china or silverware. Warren sat at the head of the table, his hands folded over his chest, like a judge awaiting a defendant. Trent sat to his right, wearing a smug, triumphant grin that made my blood boil. My mother Beverly sat to his left, her hands nervously wringing a linen napkin in her lap. The seat opposite Warren at the far end of the long table was empty, waiting for me. Resting perfectly centered on my placemat was not a dinner plate, but a massive, leather-bound legal document. "Take a seat, Jocelyn," Warren commanded, not bothering with a greeting. His voice echoed off the high ceiling designed to make me feel small. I did not sit. I walked over to the chair and looked down at the thick stack of papers. "I thought this was a family dinner to keep the peace," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Where is the food, Warren?" Trent snickered. "The only thing being served tonight is a reality check." Warren leaned forward, dropping the benevolent patriarch facade entirely. "That document is an unconditional transfer of intellectual property. It assigns total ownership of your routing algorithm, your source code, and your LLC directly to Apex Freight. You are going to sign it right now, and in exchange I will graciously drop the ruinous lawsuit my attorneys filed against you." I looked at the document, then back up at his arrogant face. "And if I refuse?" Warren laughed. It was a harsh, booming sound that scraped against the walls. "If you refuse, Jocelyn, I will instruct my legal team to drag you through the courts for the next decade. I will file injunction after injunction. I will freeze your personal accounts. I will bury you under mountains of discovery requests and legal fees until you are completely penniless. You are a glorified dispatcher who married a freelance consultant. You do not have the legal resources to fight a corporate giant. I have an army of lawyers on retainer. I will crush you, and I will not lose a single night of sleep over it." Before I could answer, my mother stood up. Her eyes were wide and pleading, playing the role of the desperate peacemaker to perfection. "Jocelyn, please just sign the papers. Do it to keep the peace. We are family. Trent's entire career as co-CEO depends on this software running smoothly. You do not even need this program, but it means everything to your brother. Just be the bigger person and give it to them so we can all move on." I stared at my mother, a woman who would gladly sacrifice my livelihood to protect her husband's bank account. "You want me to hand over proprietary software that generates millions of dollars in revenue just to keep the peace?" I asked, my voice laced with absolute disgust. "You are not asking me to be the bigger person, Beverly. You are asking me to submit to a robbery. You watched Warren drain my college fund to pay for Trent's failures, and now you want me to hand over my business so Trent can pretend to be a competent executive. It is pathetic." Trent slammed his fist on the table. "You do not have a business. You have a stolen code that belongs to this family." Warren held up a hand to silence his son. "Let her talk, Trent. Let her throw her little tantrum. It does not change the reality of the situation." Warren pointed a thick manicured finger at the legal binder. "You have absolutely no leverage, Jocelyn. You have no money to fight me. Pick up the pen and sign the transfer. It is the only way you walk out of this room with any kind of future." I looked down at the sprawling legal document. The sheer arrogance of these people was suffocating, but they had fundamentally miscalculated who they were dealing with. They thought I was terrified. They had no idea that Vanguard Holdings was currently circling their company like a great white shark. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I calmly unclasped my purse and pulled out a bright red pen. I flipped open the heavy leather cover of their intimidating legal threat. I scanned the very first paragraph of the first page. I uncapped my pen, circled a glaring typographical error in the middle of their ironclad legal demand, and scribbled the correction in bright red ink. I snapped the cap back on the pen and tossed it directly onto Warren's pristine mahogany table. The plastic clattered loudly in the silent room. "If you are going to threaten to ruin my life, Warren," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "you should at least hire corporate lawyers who know how to spell jurisdiction." I turned on my heel and walked out the door. The cool night air felt incredibly refreshing against my skin as I left Warren's estate behind me. I drove back to the city with a crystal-clear mind. The next morning, Donovan headed to the Vanguard Holdings corporate office to finalize the acquisition paperwork. I decided to use the morning to visit my old modest apartment. My lease was not up for another month, and I needed to pack up the last of my personal books and winter clothes before officially moving everything into Donovan's penthouse. I was taping up a medium-sized cardboard box when a frantic, heavy pounding echoed against my front door. I did not have to guess who it was. The rhythmic, demanding thud was a signature of my stepbrother. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Trent stood in the hallway looking absolutely terrible. His usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled, dark circles hung heavily under his eyes, and his expensive designer suit looked like he had slept in it. In one hand, he gripped a large iced coffee from a premium cafe down the street. Without waiting for an invitation, Trent pushed past me and walked into my small living room. He looked around at the stacked cardboard boxes and bare walls with a familiar sneer of disgust. "You are actually packing," Trent said, taking a loud slurp of his iced coffee. "Good. You should be packing. That stunt you pulled at dinner last night with the red pen was cute, Jocelyn, but Warren is not playing around anymore. The legal team is drafting the injunctions right now." I crossed my arms and leaned against the kitchen counter. "If the legal team is handling it, Trent, why are you standing in my living room looking like you have not slept in a week?" His jaw clenched. The bravado he was trying to project was cracking at the edges. The reality of the corporate world was finally hitting him. Legal warfare, especially the kind Warren was threatening, takes months, sometimes years to resolve. Apex Freight did not have years. They did not even have weeks. Trent set his iced coffee down on my small dining table and let out a heavy, patronizing sigh. "Listen to me, Jocelyn. I am here because I am trying to be the bigger person. Warren wants to destroy you, but I told him that destroying you takes too much time. I am the co-CEO now, and I have operational efficiency to consider. The legal battle is going to drag on, and frankly, I do not want to see my stepsister end up bankrupt and homeless over a stupid misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, keeping my voice entirely flat. "You fired me via text message on my wedding day, deactivated my credentials, and triggered an automated security lockdown on the proprietary software I built. Which part of that is a misunderstanding?" Trent waved his hand dismissively, as if my 10 years of hard work were a minor inconvenience. "Whatever. The point is, I am offering you a way out. An olive branch. I convinced Warren to let me handle this my way." He reached into the inside pocket of his wrinkled suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, rectangular slip of paper. He held it between his index and middle fingers, extending it toward me, as if he were handing bread to a starving peasant. "This is a certified cashier's check," Trent announced, his chest puffing out slightly. "It is made out to you for $100,000. I am buying your software outright. You take this check, you hand over the administrative passwords, and we call it even. You get a massive payday enough to upgrade out of this pathetic shoebox apartment, and you avoid spending the next 10 years getting crushed by Warren's lawyers. I am doing you a massive favor, Jocelyn. Take the money and walk away." I stared at the check fluttering slightly in his trembling hand. He genuinely believed this was a masterstroke of negotiation. He thought $100,000 would blind me to the reality of the situation. I slowly walked over to the table and took the check from his fingers. Trent grinned, visibly relaxing. He picked up his iced coffee, taking another triumphant sip. "See, I knew you would listen to reason. Now boot up your laptop. We need to get those trucks moving before the afternoon shipping window closes." I held the check in my hand and looked at the numbers printed across the front. Then I looked up at Trent. "Let us break down the math on this massive favor you are doing for me," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the empty apartment. "My software manages a logistics grid for 400 commercial freight trucks. Before you locked yourself out, Apex Freight was generating roughly $2 million a day in gross revenue." Trent frowned, the rim of his plastic coffee cup hovering near his mouth. "Where are you going with this?" "You fired me exactly 7 days ago," I continued, stepping closer to him. 7 days of total operational paralysis. 7 days of missed delivery windows, breached contracts, and idle drivers. That means your little ego trip has cost Warren's company $14 million in gross revenue this week alone. You have hemorrhaged $14 million in 7 days, Trent. And you have the absolute audacity to stand in my apartment and offer me $100,000 to fix a $14 million disaster that you created." The color rapidly drained from Trent's face. He opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came out. He knew my calculations were completely accurate. "This check is not an olive branch," I said softly. "This check is an insult. It is the desperate, pathetic move of a man who realizes he is driving his father's company straight off a cliff." I held his gaze as I gripped the certified check with both hands. With one swift, deliberate motion, I tore the thick paper straight down the middle. Trent gasped, his eyes widening in pure shock as I tore the halves again, reducing his massive favor to worthless scraps of confetti. I reached out and dropped the shredded pieces of the check directly through the plastic opening of his iced coffee lid. The paper soaked up the brown liquid, sinking to the bottom of the cup. "You are out of your mind," Trent stammered, stepping backward as he stared at the ruined check floating in his drink. "You just threw away 100 grand. "I am not throwing anything away," I replied, pointing toward the door. "I am holding on to an asset worth tens of millions. Now take your coffee and get out of my apartment." Trent's shock morphed instantly into a vicious, cornered rage. His face twisted into a furious snarl as he hurled the coffee cup into my kitchen sink, brown liquid and shredded paper splashing across the stainless steel. "You think you are so smart, Jocelyn?" Trent screamed, his voice vibrating with absolute malice. "You think you have us backed into a corner with this software lockdown? You think we need you? Well, you just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life." He stormed toward the front door, ripping it open with enough force to shake the walls. He turned back to face me, his eyes burning with a manic, desperate triumph. "We do not need your stupid routing algorithm anymore," Trent snarled, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "While you were playing hardball, I was actually doing business. I just secured a massive capital bailout from a major Wall Street private equity firm. They are injecting enough cash to completely replace your system and rebuild our entire digital infrastructure from the ground up. The deal closes on Monday. You are officially obsolete, Jocelyn. You get nothing." The heavy slam of my apartment door rattled the framed pictures on the wall. Trent was gone, leaving behind nothing but the lingering smell of his expensive cologne and the shredded remains of his pathetic bribe floating in the sink. I stood in the center of the living room, processing his final desperate threat. He was relying on a Wall Street bailout to replace my software. Donovan stepped out from the hallway, leaning casually against the doorframe. He had been quietly listening to the entire exchange. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face, lighting up his eyes with pure amusement. "A massive capital bailout from a major Wall Street firm," Donovan repeated, his deep voice carrying a note of genuine disbelief. "He means Vanguard Holdings. Trent just stood in your living room and bragged about handing my firm the keys to his entire digital infrastructure. He has absolutely no idea that he just sold his soul to the man standing 20 feet away from him." I let out a breath. I did not realize I was holding a sharp laugh escaping my lips. The arrogance is going to destroy him. We spent the rest of the evening packing the last of my belongings. The plan was to officially move into Donovan's penthouse by the end of the week, leaving this modest shoebox and all the memories of my family's dismissive treatment behind. The following afternoon, the buzzer to my apartment rang. I pressed the intercom, expecting the building superintendent, or perhaps a delivery driver. Instead, the grainy black and white monitor revealed Jamal standing in the lobby. He was not wearing his usual tailored suits or flashing his signature arrogant sneer. He wore a simple sweater, his shoulders slumped, looking like a man who had not slept in days. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the release button. After the ambush at the airport, my instinct was to leave him standing out in the cold, but curiosity won out. I pressed the buzzer and unlocked my front door, waiting in the hallway. When Jamal stepped off the elevator, he looked completely humbled. "Jocelyn," he said, keeping a respectful distance, "I know I am the last person you want to see right now. I just wanted to come by and apologize." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Apologize for what exactly, Jamal? For screaming at me in the arrivals terminal, or for Chelsea blaming me for her maxed-out credit cards?" "For all of it," Jamal said, his voice dripping with forced sincerity. "Chelsea was entirely out of line. We were stressed. The regional sales are tanking and we panicked. I just wanted to look you in the eye and say, I am sorry. You built a brilliant system and the board was wrong to let Trent force you out. I just wanted to clear the air before things get any worse between the family. His apology felt incredibly rehearsed, every word carefully selected to sound contrite. But I decided to play along, stepping aside to let him into the apartment. I am making some chamomile tea, I said, gesturing toward the small open concept kitchen. You can sit on the sofa. I will be right out. Thank you, Jocelyn. I really appreciate this, Jamal said, taking a seat on the edge of the couch. I turned my back and walked into the kitchen area, pulling 2 mugs from the upper cabinet. The kitchen was separated from the living room by a partial dividing wall, giving me a clear view of the stove but blocking my line of sight to the small desk where I kept my workstation. My laptop was sitting open on the desk, the screen glowing faintly, currently logged into the administrative backend of my proprietary logistics grid. I filled the kettle and turned on the burner, the sound of the running water masking any subtle noises from the living room. But I did not need to hear Jamal to know exactly what he was doing. The silence coming from the living room was unnaturally thick. I peeked around the edge of the dividing wall. Jamal was not sitting on the sofa. He was crouched over my desk, his eyes darting frantically between the hallway and the computer screen. He reached into the pocket of his sweater, pulling out a small silver flash drive. His hands were shaking visibly as he fumbled to insert the drive into the USB port of my laptop. He was not here to apologize for Chelsea. He was here to execute a corporate espionage mission, attempting to steal the raw source code of the routing algorithm directly from my hard drive to bypass the security lockdown. Before I could even step out from the kitchen to confront him, a shadow detached itself from the hallway leading to the bedroom. Donovan materialized behind Jamal with the silent, predatory grace of a panther. He did not shout. He did not raise his voice. He simply leaned forward, his voice a low, chilling rumble right next to Jamal's ear, looking for something specific. Jamal gasped violently, jerking backward. He spun around, his face draining of all color as he stared up at Donovan's imposing figure. The silver flash drive was half inserted into the port, Jamal's hand frozen in midair. I was checking the time, Jamal stammered, stumbling over his own words as he scrambled to put distance between himself and Donovan. The screen went dark, and I just bumped the keyboard. Donovan looked at the silver drive protruding from the laptop, then locked his glacial eyes onto Jamal. You are attempting to run an extraction script on a highly secure terminal. That is federal corporate theft. Jamal panicked. The false humility vanished entirely, replaced by the desperate, scrambling survival instinct of a cornered rat. He looked at Donovan, clearly misjudging the situation, still operating under the delusion that Donovan was just a broke freelance consultant living off my non-existent savings. Listen to me, man, Jamal said, lowering his voice and stepping closer, pulling out his wallet. Jocelyn is being stubborn, but this company is going under. You look like a guy who could use some steady work. Let me copy this file. You look the other way, and I will personally guarantee you a supervisor position at the Queen's distribution warehouse. It pays $60,000 a year with full medical benefits. I will even write you a cash advance right now. Just turn around and go back to the bedroom. Donovan stared at him. For a long, agonizing moment, the room was completely silent. And then Donovan laughed. It was a dark, rich sound that echoed off the bare walls of the apartment. A supervisor position at the Queen's warehouse, Donovan repeated, his eyes glinting with absolute mockery. Jamal, I just bought the commercial mortgage on that specific warehouse yesterday afternoon. I am planning to bulldoze it and build luxury condominiums. Jamal's jaw dropped. The wallet slipped from his trembling fingers, landing with a soft thud on the floor. Donovan stepped forward, gripping the silver flash drive and pulling it smoothly from the laptop. He slipped the drive into the pocket of his tailored trousers. Then he grabbed Jamal by the collar of his sweater, lifting him slightly onto his toes. "Get out of my wife's apartment!" Donovan commanded, his voice vibrating with lethal authority. "If you ever come within 50 feet of her again, I will personally ensure your adjustable rate mortgage defaults tomorrow morning." He shoved Jamal toward the door. Jamal stumbled, nearly tripping over his own feet. He did not look back, sprinting down the hallway and slamming the apartment door behind him. I walked out of the kitchen, leaning against the desk. An apology and a job offer, I noted dryly. He really pulled out all the stops. Donovan shook his head, pulling the silver flash drive from his pocket. He was sloppy. If you are going to steal proprietary source code, you do not use an unencrypted commercial drive. Let us see exactly what extraction software Trent gave his brother-in-law to do his dirty work. Donovan pulled an encrypted tablet from his briefcase. It was a secure, isolated sandbox environment designed specifically to analyze malicious hardware without exposing the host network. He plugged Jamal's silver drive into the tablet. Lines of code began scrolling rapidly across the dark screen as the sandbox mapped the contents of the drive. Donovan's eyes narrowed as he scanned the directory tree. He tapped the screen, opening a hidden password-protected folder that Jamal had apparently forgotten was stored on his personal device. Jocelyn, Donovan said, his voice suddenly stripped of all amusement. "You need to look at this." I walked over and looked at the tablet screen. It was not an extraction script. It was a massive directory of PDF receipts, wire transfer logs, and offshore banking confirmations. "Trent did not send Jamal to steal your code," Donovan explained, scrolling through the damning documents. "Jamal came here to steal it on his own using his personal backup drive, a drive he apparently uses to store leverage against his co-CEO. I stared at the screen, my eyes widening as I read the amounts on the wire transfers. $200,000, $500,000, routed directly from Apex Freight's operating accounts into private holding companies in Macau and the Cayman Islands. "Trent has not just been mismanaging the company," Donovan said, a ruthless smile returning to his face. "He has been systematically embezzling corporate funds to pay off massive unregulated gambling debts. He is stealing millions from his own father." I stared at the screen, the sheer scale of Trent's deception paralyzing my thoughts for a brief, breathless moment. He was not just an incompetent executive coasting on nepotism. He was a parasite bleeding his own father dry to cover illegal gambling debts. We held the ultimate leverage right in our hands. But before we could even deploy that radioactive information, Warren launched a preemptive strike. The following morning, I stepped out into the crisp Manhattan air, desperately needing a dark roast coffee and a moment to organize the chaos in my head. The morning rush was in full swing at the corner cafe, businessmen and students crowding the narrow space. As I reached the counter to grab my order, a man in a rumpled gray suit stepped directly into my path, completely ignoring the line of waiting customers. "Jocelyn," he asked, his tone clipped and professional. I nodded automatically. He shoved a thick, heavy manila envelope aggressively against my chest. "You have been served." He turned on his heel and walked out before I could even process the words. I tore open the seal, right there in the crowded cafe, my hands suddenly trembling. It was a formal complaint filed in federal court. Warren was officially suing me for corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and malicious interference with business operations. He was seeking $50 million in damages. He had bypassed the empty threats and gone straight for the jugular, initiating a legal war of attrition designed to bankrupt me before I could ever see the inside of a courtroom. By noon, the targeted assassination of my professional reputation was in full swing. My phone did not stop ringing, but it was not to offer support. The logistics industry is a tightly knit circle, controlled by a few massive players, and Warren was one of the loudest voices in the room. He had leaked the filed lawsuit to every major trade publication and corporate client list on the East Coast. My inbox flooded with immediate cancellation notices. The 3 independent consulting contracts I had carefully nurtured over the past 5 years evaporated in the span of 2 hours. Clients who had praised my work just a week ago suddenly refused to take my calls, citing severe liability concerns. Warren was systematically blacklisting me, using his immense corporate weight to choke out my entire livelihood. Just when I thought the isolation was absolute, my phone buzzed with a message from a former high school friend. The text contained no words, only a link to a social media platform. I clicked it and felt my stomach drop into my shoes. It was a live video on my mother's public profile, already boasting tens of thousands of views and hundreds of sympathetic comments from her wealthy country club circle. Beverly was sitting in her lavish sunroom, perfectly styled, delicately dabbing at her dry eyes with a monogrammed tissue. She was delivering an Oscar-worthy performance of a heartbroken matriarch. It is truly devastating when the child you raised turns against her own blood. Beverly sniffled into the camera, her voice dripping with manufactured trembling sorrow. We took her in, we provided for her, we gave her every advantage in life. We treated her as our own, and she repays us with unfathomable greed. She is deliberately trying to sabotage her brother's career out of pure vindictive jealousy. She is holding our family business hostage. I never thought I would see the day when my own daughter became so consumed by bitterness. She did not mention that I had worked 3 jobs to pay off student loans because she had drained my college savings to buy Trent a luxury sports car. She did not mention that the family business was currently surviving entirely on software I built while working 80-hour weeks for a fraction of my market value. She simply painted a picture of a greedy, hysterical spinster trying to ruin an innocent family. The comment section was a firing squad. Complete strangers were calling me a monster, a parasite, and a gold digger. I dropped my phone onto the sofa and sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. A dark, suffocating wave of despair washed over me. I was fighting a war against a machine that had no conscience. They had infinite money, infinite influence, and absolutely no moral boundaries. The sheer exhaustion of battling my own family finally broke through my defenses. I had a stolen flash drive and a brilliant mind, but in the face of Warren's legal army and Beverly's social media character assassination, I suddenly felt incredibly small and entirely defeated. They were going to win because they simply did not care who they destroyed in the process. I buried my face in my hands, fighting back hot tears of frustration. The front door clicked open, and Donovan walked into the apartment. He took one look at me sitting on the floor surrounded by packing boxes and the thick legal binder, and immediately understood the shift in gravity. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not crouch down and tell me that everything was going to be fine. He walked directly to his briefcase, pulled out his laptop, and sat on the floor right next to me, crossing his long legs. "Warren served me," I whispered, my voice rough. "50 million in damages. Mom is playing the victim online. Every client I have left just dropped me. Trent is getting a bailout to replace my software, and I have absolutely nothing left to fight them with." Donovan opened his laptop, the screen illuminating his sharp, intensely focused features. "Stop looking at the illusions your family is projecting, Jocelyn," he commanded, his voice a steady magnetic force that demanded my attention. "And look at the reality." He angled the screen toward me. He had pulled up a complex corporate structure chart, a massive web of holding companies, subsidiaries, and global investment portfolios. At the center of the web was a sleek corporate logo I recognized immediately from Trent's arrogant boasting yesterday. "This is Pinnacle Capital," Donovan stated smoothly, his finger tracing the intersecting lines on the screen. "The major Wall Street private equity firm Trent just went to, begging for a cash injection. The firm he believes is going to hand him a multi-million-dollar bailout on Monday morning to completely rebuild your software and save his career." I stared at the screen, my eyes scanning the intricate hierarchy of the financial behemoth. "Why are you showing me the firm that is about to save them?" "Because Trent is a desperate amateur who does not read the fine print on his term sheets," Donovan replied, a slow, predatory smile curving his lips. "Look at the executive leadership directory." I dragged my eyes up to the top of the corporate chart, moving past the managing partners and the senior vice presidents, until my gaze landed on the absolute peak of the pyramid. My breath hitched sharply in my throat. I blinked, certain my eyes were deceiving me, but the bold black text remained unchanged. Listed at the very top of the board of directors, holding the title of chairman and majority shareholder, was a single name: Donovan Montgomery. I stared at the bold black text, Donovan Montgomery. The name anchored the top of the corporate hierarchy, undisputed and absolute. I looked from the glowing screen to the man sitting beside me on the floor. I looked at the screen. I looked at my husband. I looked back at the screen. He was not a struggling freelance consultant. He was not a man scraping by on short-term contracts. He was not the quiet background partner my family had constantly dismissed as a financial deadweight. He was the apex predator of Wall Street. He was the machine. "You own Pinnacle Capital?" I whispered, my voice barely breaking the heavy silence of the living room. I am the managing partner and the majority shareholder. Donovan replied, his tone entirely calm, completely devoid of the arrogance that usually accompanied such immense power. I built it from the ground up, Jocelyn, just like you built your software. My mind spun trying to reconcile the billionaire titan on the screen with the man who helped me wash dishes in our tiny galley kitchen, the man who split the rent on this cramped apartment, the man who quietly supported me through 80-hour work weeks. Why, I asked, the single word carrying a heavy weight of confusion and a sudden sharp edge of betrayal. You let me pay the rent. You let me pay for the groceries. We budgeted for weekend takeout. Why would you hide this from me? Donovan did not flinch. He reached out his large, warm hands, gently grasping my shoulders, grounding me in the reality of the moment. Because of what money does to people, Jocelyn, he said, his glacial eyes locking onto mine with absolute sincerity. Because of what wealth attracts and what it destroys. Before I met you, I spent a decade surrounded by vultures. Women who only saw a walking bank account. Men who only wanted proximity to power. I was surrounded by fake smiles, fake loyalty, and fake love. I was drowning in it. I wanted someone real. I needed someone real. He brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear. And then I met you. You were fierce, you were brilliant, you were completely independent. You never asked me for a dime. You never asked me for a favor. You never looked at me and calculated my net worth. You loved me for me. You built your own wealth, your own algorithm, your own empire. And you did it while carrying the dead weight of a family that never appreciated you. I did not want my money to cast a shadow over your brilliance. I wanted to be your partner, not your benefactor. His words settled deep into my chest, extinguishing the brief spark of anger. The repetition of his loyalty, the repetition of his absolute faith in me, stood in stark contrast to the repetition of my family's constant, systemic betrayal. My mother had just gone online to label me a parasite. My father had just sued me for $50 million to crush me into submission. They wanted me destitute. They wanted me broken. They wanted me crawling back on my knees. But Donovan had simply watched me build my own armor, quietly standing guard. I took a deep breath, the initial shock morphing into a cold, sharp clarity. Okay, you are a Wall Street billionaire, but why are you showing me this right now? Why today? Donovan turned back to the laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He opened a new encrypted window, pulling up a highly confidential financial dossier. Because your brother is an absolute fool, Donovan said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on the ruthless edge of a corporate conqueror. Trent walked into my firm's downtown office on Friday afternoon. He was desperate to plug the $14 million hole you created when you locked down the logistics grid. Desperate men do not read the fine print. Desperate men do not ask questions. Desperate men just sign on the dotted line. Donovan turned the screen toward me again. It was a fully executed lending agreement. Trent's signature was scrawled aggressively across the bottom of the final page. He came begging for a massive capital bailout to replace your entire digital infrastructure, Donovan explained, tracing the terms of the contract. He needed cash immediately to appease their vendors and prevent a total operational collapse. My firm gave it to him. We gave him exactly what he asked for, a $50 million bridge loan. I stared at the numbers. $50 million. The exact amount Warren was currently suing me for. They were using Donovan's money to fund their legal war against me. What are the terms? I asked, leaning closer to the screen. Brutal. Donovan smiled, a predatory flash of teeth. It is a heavily leveraged, highly secured debt instrument. Trent used Apex Freight's core physical assets as collateral. The trucks, the distribution centers, the commercial leases. He even leveraged Warren's personal controlling shares in the holding company to secure the cash advance. My jaw dropped. Trent bet the entire company. He bet everything Warren built on a single desperate loan. And here is the beautiful part. Jocelyn Donovan continued tapping a specific clause buried deep within the legal jargon. Standard covenant requirements. To maintain the loan, Apex Freight must maintain continuous, uninterrupted operational capacity. They signed this document explicitly stating that their logistics network was fully functional and generating revenue. But it is not functional. I realized the puzzle pieces slamming together with explosive force. I locked them out. The trucks are not moving. The routes are failing. They are bleeding $2 million a day. Exactly, Donovan said softly. By signing this document, while their entire system was paralyzed, Trent committed material financial misrepresentation. He breached the covenant the second the ink dried on the paper. The loan is already in default. Apex Freight is in default. I looked at my husband, fully comprehending the magnitude of what he had just orchestrated. Warren thought he had me cornered. Beverly thought she had destroyed my public reputation. Trent thought he had found a financial savior. They had no idea they had just handed the executioner's sword directly to the man who slept in my bed. They had blindly walked into a slaughterhouse. Donovan closed the laptop with a definitive snap. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a dark, terrifying devotion. He had handed me the ultimate weapon, a weapon forged from my family's own towering arrogance. He leaned in his voice a low, thrilling whisper. Are you ready to foreclose on your family? I looked at the man sitting on my living room floor, processing the absolute magnitude of the weapon he had just placed in my hands. The fear that had been paralyzing me just moments ago evaporated completely. In its place, a cold, calculating clarity took hold. For 10 years, my family had banked on my submission. They had relied on my loyalty, my guilt, and my desperate desire for their approval to keep me chained to my desk, generating their wealth while they treated me like a disposable servant. They assumed I would simply break under the pressure of their coordinated attack. I met Donovan's glacial gaze and nodded slowly. Let us take everything from them. Donovan smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that promised absolute ruin for anyone standing in our way. He closed his laptop and stood up, pulling me to my feet. First, we need to gather them all in one room. He explained, his tone shifting into pure strategic command. We need them completely complacent. We need them to believe they have won. You have to give them exactly what they expect to see. A broken, defeated, desperate woman begging for a truce. I picked up my phone, my fingers gripping the edges of the device. I dialed Warren's direct office line. As the phone rang, I closed my eyes, summoning every ounce of exhaustion and betrayal I had felt over the past week. I let my shoulders slump. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. Warren answered on the second ring, his voice barking through the speaker with characteristic impatience. What is it, Jocelyn? The legal team told you to direct all communications through them. I let out a shaky, trembling breath, making sure he could hear the artificial tremor in my voice. You win, Warren, I whispered, sounding utterly defeated. I cannot fight you anymore. The silence on the other end of the line was thick with immediate, hungry satisfaction. The lawsuit, Mom's video, my clients dropping my contracts. I continued, letting my voice crack perfectly. I am completely out of money. My professional reputation is ruined in this city. I have nothing left to fight you with. I am ready to surrender the software. A harsh, booming laugh erupted from the speaker. I could practically picture Warren leaning back in his leather executive chair, puffing out his chest, victorious. I told you, Jocelyn. Warren gloated, his tone dripping with patronizing venom. You cannot bite the hand that feeds you and expect to survive the real world. You played a stupid game of chicken with my company, and you lost. You should have taken the severance check when Trent offered it to you. Now you get absolutely nothing. I swallowed hard, playing the role of the submissive, humbled daughter down to the last syllable. I know, I said quietly. I just want this nightmare to be over. I will hand over the master administrative passwords and sign the intellectual property transfer documents today. But I want to do it properly. I want a formal board meeting at the Apex Freight headquarters. I want to look you in the eye, sign the papers, and walk out of that building knowing I am completely severed from this family and this company forever. Warren did not hesitate for a single second. His massive ego simply could not resist the opportunity to parade my defeat in front of a live audience. He wanted the spectacle. He wanted to watch me surrender my life's work in his boardroom, surrounded by the towering glass walls of his empire. Tomorrow morning at 10 sharp, Warren commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. Have the access codes ready. Do not be late, Jocelyn. I am not paying my corporate attorneys by the hour to wait for you to stop crying. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, looking up at Donovan. The fake tremor in my hands vanished, replaced by rock-solid stillness. We are in. Within 2 hours, the toxic ripple effect of my phone call became apparent. My phone buzzed with a text message from Chelsea. Trent just told us you are finally giving up and signing over the software. Mom and Dad are hosting a massive celebration lunch at the country club after you sign the papers tomorrow morning. Jamal and I are coming to the boardroom to watch you formally apologize to the family for causing this ridiculous disruption. Try to look presentable for once in your life. I stared at the glowing screen. They were all coming. Warren had turned my supposed surrender into a family event. He had invited Beverly to watch her scapegoat daughter fail. He had invited Trent to gloat over his stolen victory. He had invited Chelsea and Jamal to witness my ultimate humiliation. They were assembling the entire clan in one room to watch me beg for mercy. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight into their own financial execution. The next morning, the atmosphere inside Donovan's penthouse was electric, humming with the quiet, lethal energy of a looming strike. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite, carefully adjusting the collar of my tailored black blazer. I paired it with a sharp ivory silk blouse and high-waisted trousers. I did not look like the exhausted, overworked IT girl they were accustomed to seeing huddled in the server room. I looked polished, commanding, and ready for corporate warfare. I slid my feet into a pair of sleek stiletto pumps, feeling my new armor lock into place. I turned and walked toward the adjoining dressing room to find Donovan finishing his own preparations. For the entire duration of our relationship, he had worn modest off-the-rack suits to perfectly play the part of a struggling freelance consultant. Those cheap fabrics and muted colors were nowhere in sight today. Donovan stood before the mirror, slipping his broad shoulders into a custom midnight blue Tom Ford suit that fell with immaculate, devastating precision. The cut and fabric screamed of absolute, untouchable wealth. He adjusted his silk cuffs, his movements deliberate and predatory. He did not look like a supportive husband, accompanying his wife to a difficult family meeting. He looked like an apex predator, preparing to devour an entire boardroom. He reached into a velvet-lined display drawer on his dresser. He bypassed the simple leather bands he usually wore, pulling out a heavy platinum Patek Philippe watch. He snapped the $150,000 timepiece onto his wrist, the metal glinting sharply in the morning light. He turned to face me, his glacial eyes locking onto mine with a dark, thrilling promise. Let us go buy a freight company. The drive to the Apex Freight headquarters was a masterclass in silent anticipation. The towering structure of glass and steel loomed against the gray morning sky, a physical monument to Warren's ego and the decades of family dysfunction it housed. I walked through the revolving doors of the main lobby with my head held high, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. For 10 years I had entered this building through the side doors, rushing to fix server crashes and patch coding errors while my family dined in executive suites. Today I was walking straight toward the heart of the empire. Donovan walked beside me, an imposing silent shadow. The midnight blue Tom Ford suit draped over his broad shoulders like absolute armor, the platinum Patek Philippe watch catching the cold overhead lights. Yet the receptionist at the front desk barely glanced at him, her eyes locking onto me with a mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment. She had clearly read the industry blogs. Everyone in the building believed I was a disgraced, ruined woman arriving for my public execution. I stepped into the private executive elevator and swiped my access card one final time. The doors slid shut, sealing us in a quiet ascent to the top floor. When the elevator chimed and the doors parted, I did not hesitate. I pushed open the heavy mahogany double doors of the boardroom and stepped inside. The scene before me was framed perfectly against the panoramic backdrop of the Manhattan skyline. The entire family was assembled around the massive custom-built conference table looking like an oil painting of corporate royalty. Warren sat at the absolute head of the table, his posture rigid and victorious, his hands steepled beneath his chin. Trent was seated to his immediate right, practically vibrating with smug, unrestrained energy. Chelsea and Jamal occupied the leather chairs opposite Trent, leaning close together and whispering like high school bullies. At the far end of the room, lounging in a chair that was meant for senior partners, sat my mother. Beverly wore a pristine designer tennis outfit and oversized sunglasses pushed back into her meticulously styled hair. She was holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, looking profoundly bored by the entire proceeding. Donovan stepped into the room behind me, pulling the heavy wooden doors shut with a quiet, definitive click. He did not take a seat. He simply moved to the corner of the room, folding his arms across his chest and leaning his shoulder against the expensive wood paneling. My family barely registered his presence. In their eyes, he was still just the broke, useless husband I had stubbornly chosen over their wealthy country club prospects. They were entirely focused on me. "Well," Warren boomed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. He gestured toward the single empty chair situated at the opposite end of the long table, directly in the crosshairs of their collective gaze. "You actually showed up. I thought the legal complaint might have sent you running out of the state by now. Have a seat, Jocelyn. We have a lot of expensive corporate business to finalize." I walked the length of the room, keeping my expression perfectly blank. I sat down in the leather chair, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "I am here to end this," I said, keeping my voice flat and completely devoid of emotion. Trent barked out a harsh, victorious laugh. He grabbed a thick-bound legal folder from the table and slid it aggressively across the polished wood. The heavy document came to a halt right in front of me. "You are here to surrender." Trent corrected, his chest puffing out with unearned pride. "Read it carefully, little sister. Those are the intellectual property transfer agreements. By signing that document, you are formally relinquishing all ownership rights and administrative access to the logistics routing algorithm. You are handing the keys to the kingdom back to the rightful owners." I looked down at the thick stack of paper, then back up at my brother. "And the compensation clause?" I asked, playing my part flawlessly. "Zero," Trent sneered, slamming his hand flat against the table. "You get absolutely nothing. In fact, you owe us. You cost this company $14 million with your little temper tantrum. The only reason we are not garnishing your future wages for the next 50 years is because we are feeling generous." The document also includes a permanent, legally binding gag order. You will never speak to the press, you will never discuss this company, and you will never mention this family in public again. If you break the non-disclosure agreement, Warren's legal team will seize whatever pathetic assets you manage to scrape together for the rest of your natural life. "You really outdid yourself, Trent," I murmured, flipping open the first page of the document. The legal jargon was dense and punitive, designed to completely erase my existence from the company's history. Trent leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms behind his head. "I did not even break a sweat. You thought you had us cornered, Jocelyn, but you severely underestimated who you were dealing with. I secured a $50 million capital injection from Pinnacle Capital yesterday afternoon. The funds hit our holding accounts this morning. I am going to hire a team of top-tier developers to completely rebuild your amateur software. You are officially obsolete." A loud, exasperated sigh echoed from the far corner of the room. Beverly set her crystal glass down on the coaster with a sharp clink. "Can we please speed this along?" Beverly complained, waving her manicured hand in my direction. "I have a dress fitting at 2 o'clock and the traffic across town is going to be an absolute nightmare. Just sign the paper quickly, Jocelyn, so we can all go out to lunch. You have caused enough disruption for 1 week. Try to show a little bit of grace and bow out quietly." I stared at my mother, marveling at her absolute lack of shame. She had publicly destroyed my character on the internet just 24 hours ago, and now she was annoyed that my corporate execution was cutting into her shopping schedule. Jamal snickered, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. He looked entirely too comfortable for a man who had tried to steal my source code from my living room the previous day. "Do not worry, Jocelyn." Jamal mocked, his voice dripping with condescension. "It is not the end of the world. With your basic computer skills, I am sure you can find something else." If you get really desperate after the eviction notices start rolling in, I can pull some strings. You can apply for an entry-level data entry job at one of the regional dispatch centers. It pays minimum wage, but it will keep the lights on in that depressing little apartment of yours. Chelsea giggled loudly, covering her mouth with her hand and leaning into Jamal's shoulder. I looked around the room, taking in their triumphant, sneering faces. They were absolutely drunk on their own perceived power. They had spent their entire lives treating me like dirt beneath their shoes, and they genuinely believed they had finally buried me for good. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy gold pen resting beside the legal binder. I held the pen between my fingers, hovering the tip just an inch above the signature line on the final page of the surrender document. The entire boardroom held its collective breath. Warren leaned forward eagerly. Trent's eyes were practically glowing with greedy anticipation. Beverly checked her watch. I let the silence stretch out heavy and suffocating before I casually placed the gold pen back down onto the table. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. "I would love to sign this," I said, my voice cutting through the thick tension like a blade. "But I am afraid there is a rather significant procedural error in this contract. Don't we need the primary debt holders present for a total IP transfer?" I stared at the intricate web of corporate holding companies on the glowing laptop screen, the reality of Donovan's words ringing in my ears. He had not just given me a way to fight back. He had handed me the keys to a financial nuclear warhead. My family had spent the entire weekend trying to crush me into dust, using every dirty, underhanded tactic they could conjure. They had sued me for $50 million. They had launched a coordinated smear campaign to destroy my professional reputation. They had driven my clients away. They wanted me destitute, begging on my knees for a fraction of what I had earned. Instead, Trent's towering arrogance had driven him straight into Donovan's trap. Trent had signed away the company's entire physical infrastructure as collateral for a loan that was already in default. Pinnacle Capital held the paper. Pinnacle Capital held the power. And the man sitting next to me on the living room floor held Pinnacle Capital. I looked at my husband, the quiet, steadfast man who had washed dishes with me in our cramped galley kitchen, who had supported my 80-hour work weeks without a single complaint. The sheer scale of his deception could have been overwhelming, but in the face of my family's relentless cruelty, his secret wealth was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. He had shielded his empire because he wanted a partner, not a parasite. Now, he was offering me the power to dismantle the parasites who had tormented me for my entire life. Yes, I breathed the word, leaving my lips with a cold, terrifying, absolute certainty. I am ready to foreclose on all of them. Donovan's predatory smile widened. He closed his laptop and leaned back against the sofa. "Then you need to give them exactly what they want," he instructed, his voice dropping into the smooth, commanding cadence of a Wall Street titan. "You need to make them feel invincible. You need to make them believe their tactics worked perfectly. A desperate enemy is unpredictable. A victorious enemy is sloppy." I nodded, understanding the strategy instantly. I picked up my phone from the floor. My hands were perfectly steady. I found Warren's direct office line in my contacts. Before pressing the call button, I took a deep breath, intentionally dropping my shoulders and letting my face slacken into an expression of utter defeat. I needed to sound broken. I needed to sound like the frightened, obedient daughter they had spent years conditioning me to be. I pressed call. The line rang twice before Warren's gruff, impatient voice barked through the speaker. "What do you want?" Jocelyn Warren snapped. "My corporate attorneys instructed you to direct all correspondence through their office. I am not interested in hearing your excuses." I forced a ragged, trembling sigh into the receiver. "You win, Warren," I whispered, letting my voice crack with manufactured despair. "I cannot fight you anymore." The sudden silence on the other end of the line was thick with hungry satisfaction. I could practically hear Warren leaning back in his leather executive chair, puffing out his chest. "What was that?" Warren asked, his tone dripping with patronizing venom. "Speak up, Jocelyn. I can barely hear you." "I said you win," I repeated, making sure to sound thoroughly exhausted. "The lawsuit mom's video, my clients dropping my contracts. You took everything. I am completely out of money. My professional reputation is ruined in this city. I have nothing left to fight you with. I am ready to surrender the software." A harsh, booming laugh erupted from the speaker. It was not just Warren laughing. I could hear Trent's obnoxious cackle echoing in the background. They had me on speakerphone. "I told you," Jocelyn Warren gloated, relishing every syllable of his perceived victory. "You cannot bite the hand that feeds you and expect to survive the real world. You played a stupid game of chicken with my company and you lost. You should have taken the miserable little severance check when Trent generously offered it to you. Now you get absolutely nothing. You are going to walk away empty-handed just like you deserve." I swallowed hard, playing the role of the submissive, humbled victim down to the absolute limit. "I know," I said quietly. "I just want this nightmare to be over. I will hand over the master administrative passwords and sign the intellectual property transfer documents. But I want to do it properly. I want a formal board meeting at the Apex Freight headquarters tomorrow morning. I want to look you in the eye, sign the papers, and walk out of that building knowing I am completely severed from this family forever." Warren did not hesitate. His massive ego simply could not resist the opportunity to parade my defeat in front of a live audience. He wanted the spectacle. He wanted to watch me surrender my life's work in his boardroom, surrounded by the towering glass walls of his empire, so he could definitively prove his dominance. "Tomorrow morning at 10 sharp," Warren commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Have the access codes ready. And Jocelyn, do not be late. I am not paying my corporate attorneys by the hour to wait for you to finish crying." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, looking up at Donovan. The fake tremor in my hands vanished, replaced by rock-solid stillness. "We are in." Within 2 hours, the toxic ripple effect of my phone call became apparent. My phone buzzed with a text message from Chelsea. "Trent just told us you are finally giving up and signing over the software. Mom and Dad are hosting a massive celebration lunch at the country club after you sign the papers tomorrow morning. Jamal and I are coming to the boardroom to watch you formally apologize to the family for causing this ridiculous disruption. Try to look presentable for once in your life." I stared at the glowing screen, a genuine smile curving my lips. They were all coming. Warren had turned my supposed surrender into a family event. He had invited Beverly to watch her scapegoat daughter fail. He had invited Trent to gloat over his stolen victory. He had invited Chelsea and Jamal to witness my ultimate humbling. They were assembling the entire clan in one room to watch me beg for mercy. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight into their own financial execution. The next morning, the atmosphere inside Donovan's penthouse was electric, humming with the quiet, lethal energy of a looming strike. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite, carefully adjusting the collar of my tailored black blazer. I paired it with a sharp ivory silk blouse and high-waisted trousers. I did not look like the exhausted, overworked IT girl they were accustomed to seeing huddled in the server room. I looked polished, commanding, and ready for corporate warfare. I slid my feet into a pair of sleek stiletto pumps, feeling my new armor lock into place. I turned and walked toward the adjoining dressing room to find Donovan finishing his own preparations. For the entire duration of our relationship, he had worn modest off-the-rack suits to perfectly play the part of a struggling freelance consultant. Those cheap fabrics and muted colors were nowhere in sight today. Donovan stood before the mirror, slipping his broad shoulders into a custom midnight blue Tom Ford suit that fell with immaculate, devastating precision. The cut and fabric screamed of absolute, untouchable wealth. He adjusted his silk cuffs, his movements deliberate and predatory. He did not look like a supportive husband, accompanying his wife to a difficult family meeting. He looked like an apex predator, preparing to devour an entire boardroom. He reached into a velvet-lined display drawer on his dresser. He bypassed the simple leather bands he usually wore, pulling out a heavy platinum Patek Philippe watch. He snapped the $150,000 timepiece onto his wrist, the metal glinting sharply in the morning light. He turned to face me, his glacial eyes locking onto mine with a dark, thrilling promise. "Are you ready?" Donovan asked, his voice a low, magnetic rumble. I looked at the man who had secretly held the power to destroy my tormentors all along, the man who had waited patiently for me to realize my own worth before handing me the sword. "I am ready," I replied. "Let us go buy a freight company." Warren scoffed a harsh, abrasive sound that vibrated against the expensive glass walls of the boardroom. He leaned forward, placing his heavy forearms on the polished mahogany table, looking at me as if I were a slow, confused child who had just asked a painfully stupid question. "Debt holders," Warren repeated, shaking his head with a mixture of pity and absolute contempt. "You really have no idea how high-level corporate finance actually works. Do you, Jocelyn? You spent your entire life staring at computer screens and writing lines of code completely blind to how the real world operates." Trent laughed, leaning back in his executive chair and crossing his ankles with the relaxed posture of a man who believed he had already won the war. "Pinnacle Capital is a private equity firm, Jocelyn. They are a silent financial partner. They inject the cash, they collect their premium interest, and they let the actual adults run the business. They could not care less about our internal family squabbles or the exact legal mechanics of an intellectual property transfer. They just want their return on investment." I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, my expression an unreadable mask of calm. "Is that what they told you when you signed the agreement, Trent?" I asked, keeping my voice mild, almost conversational. I was marveling at the sheer breathtaking scale of his incompetence. "Did you actually read the operating covenants before you leveraged the entire company? Did you even meet the managing partner?" Trent waved his hand dismissively, irritated that I was questioning his business acumen. "I dealt directly with their senior vice presidents, the people who actually matter and make the decisions. They took one look at our asset sheets, saw the immense value of Apex Freight, and practically threw $50 million at me. It took me less than 48 hours to secure a bridge loan that completely neutralized your little temper tantrum. They do not care about you, Jocelyn. They only care about the physical assets, and I handed them a rock-solid portfolio." Chelsea let out a sharp, mocking sigh from across the table. "Are you just trying to stall?" she asked, rolling her eyes and checking her phone. "Because this is getting genuinely pathetic. You lost Jocelyn. Just accept it with a tiny shred of dignity." Beverly tapped her manicured fingernails against her crystal water glass, the sharp clicking sound echoing in the large room. "I have to agree with Chelsea," my mother complained, her voice tight with manufactured exhaustion. "If you are sitting there hoping some magical corporate savior is going to walk through those doors and rescue you from the consequences of your own actions, you are going to be waiting a very long time. Sign the paper, Jocelyn. I am entirely tired of looking at you, and my lunch reservation is in 45 minutes. Jamal snickered, leaning closer to Chelsea and whispering something in her ear that made her giggle. They were all so perfectly, beautifully complacent. They were sitting inside a burning house, completely oblivious to the smell of smoke. I did not touch the gold pen. I did not break eye contact with Warren. I simply waited. The heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom did not just open. They swung wide with a forceful, synchronized motion that instantly commanded the attention of every single person in the room. The sheer violence of the entrance caused Warren to flinch, his commanding posture snapping into sudden alert. Two men stepped through the threshold first. They were not building security, and they were certainly not administrative assistants. They were high-powered corporate litigators. I recognized the type immediately. They wore charcoal gray suits that cost more than a reliable car, their faces set in expressions of ruthless professional indifference. They carried thick, leather-bound briefcases, moving with the synchronized precision of an elite military unit. They stepped apart, flanking the doorway to make room for the man walking directly behind them. Donovan entered the boardroom. The air in the room seemed to physically change, the atmospheric pressure dropping the second he crossed the threshold. He was wearing the custom midnight blue Tom Ford suit, the fabric absorbing the light and projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. His broad shoulders completely filled the doorway. The platinum Patek Philippe watch glinted coldly on his wrist as he adjusted his cuff. His glacial eyes swept across the conference table, dismissing Warren Trent and my mother with a single terrifying glance before locking onto me. For a brief suspended moment, my family simply stared in utter confusion. Their brains were actively struggling to process the visual information in front of them. They knew Donovan. They knew the quiet, modest man who usually wore faded sweaters and stood silently in the background at awkward holiday dinners. They knew the man they had relentlessly mocked behind his back for being a financial failure. Jamal was the first to break the silence, his arrogant snicker shattering the quiet. He leaned back in his leather chair, a wide, mocking grin spreading across his face. "Who let the broke husband in?" Jamal laughed, pointing a finger at Donovan. "Seriously, how did you even get past the lobby security? Are you here to carry her bags out to the street because she is definitely not going to be able to afford a cab home after today?" Beverly let out an indignant huff, glaring at the doorway. "This is a private corporate meeting," she snapped, her voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. "Warren, call security immediately and have this man removed. I will not have my family business interrupted by a struggling freelancer who cannot even afford a proper haircut." Warren slammed his hand flat against the table, his face flushing dark red with anger. "You have exactly 5 seconds to turn around and walk out of my building." "Montgomery," Warren bellowed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You have absolutely no business being here. This is a closed board meeting for Apex Freight executives. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." Donovan did not flinch. He did not react to Jamal's taunt. He did not acknowledge Beverly's insult. He completely, utterly ignored Warren's booming command. He moved forward into the room, his long strides eating up the distance to the conference table with predatory grace. The two corporate litigators fell into step perfectly behind him, a unified wall of devastating legal power. Donovan stopped at the edge of the table. He did not look at my family. He looked straight ahead, his presence dominating the entire room, forcing everyone else to shrink back in their expensive leather chairs. The silence stretched out again, heavy, suffocating, and entirely controlled by the man they had just insulted. The lead corporate lawyer stepped forward. He placed his heavy leather briefcase on the polished mahogany table with a resounding thud. He completely ignored Jamal, bypassed Warren entirely, and turned his full, undivided attention directly to Donovan. "Mr. Managing Director," the lawyer stated, his voice clear, cold, and carrying absolute professional deference, "the default documents are ready." The entire boardroom went deathly still. The lawyer's words hung in the air, cold and sharp, severing the tension like a guillotine. Warren's arrogant smirk vanished instantly. His eyes darted from the charcoal-suited litigator to Donovan, his brain violently rejecting the impossible data it was receiving. He looked at the heavy leather briefcase, then at the platinum watch gleaming on Donovan's wrist, and finally at the absolute, terrifying confidence radiating from the man he had just threatened to have arrested. Managing Director Warren repeated the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. He blinked, a sudden, sickening realization draining the color from his face. "Montgomery, Donovan Montgomery, you are Pinnacle Capital." "I am," Donovan replied smoothly. Without asking for permission, Donovan walked directly to the head of the conference table. Warren was so paralyzed by shock that he physically recoiled, sinking back into his leather chair as Donovan loomed over him. Donovan did not take Warren's seat. He simply stood beside it, claiming the space, projecting an authority that made my father look like a frightened middle manager. The lead corporate attorney snapped his briefcase open. He pulled out a thick, pristine stack of legal documents bound in a dark blue cover. He slid them across the polished mahogany surface. The heavy thud of the paper coming to rest in the center of the table made Trent physically jump. "Your son is a remarkably eager negotiator," Warren Donovan stated, his voice a low, echoing baritone that commanded the room. "When he came to my downtown offices on Friday, desperate for a cash injection to cover the catastrophic logistical failure he created, we were more than happy to oblige. Apex Freight is a legacy company. It has value." But Trent did not read the venture debt agreement he was signing. He was too desperate to get his hands on $50 million to actually review the terms of his own surrender. Trent's face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. He sat up straight, his chest heaving as panic began to fracture his confident facade. "That was a standard bridge loan," Trent stammered, his voice climbing an octave. "I secured our operational future. The interest rate was high, but the capital gave us exactly what we needed to completely rebuild the digital infrastructure and bypass Jocelyn entirely. I saved this company." "You sold this company for parts," Donovan corrected effortlessly. You signed a predatory, highly leveraged venture debt agreement that used every single physical asset Apex Freight owns as collateral. You leveraged the trucks. You leveraged the commercial real estate. You even leveraged your father's controlling shares. You bet the entire bloodline of this family on a single contract. And you did it while actively lying to my firm about the functional state of your logistics grid. Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the mocking grin entirely wiped from his face. Chelsea was staring at Donovan with her mouth slightly open, completely unable to comprehend that the man she had mocked for years was currently orchestrating their financial execution. Beverly sat frozen in the corner, her crystal water glass trembling slightly in her manicured hand. "That does not matter," Trent argued, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "We have the capital. The loan is secure. We are actively hiring a new development team today. We have a grace period to stabilize the software." Donovan smiled. It was a cold, terrifying expression. He reached out and placed his index finger on the blue-bound contract, sliding it perfectly across the table until it rested directly in front of Trent. "There is no grace period," Donovan said. "Open the document to page 47. Trent stared at the contract as if it were a live explosive. He hesitated, his hands shaking as he reached out and flipped past the thick sections of legal jargon. He found the page, his eyes darting frantically across the dense paragraphs. "Read Clause 4.2 aloud," Donovan commanded. Trent opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His throat worked convulsively. He looked up at Warren, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. "Read it." Warren barked, his voice strained with rising panic. Trent looked back down at the paper. His voice was a weak, trembling whisper. "Any termination of key personnel without prior board approval constitutes an immediate event of default." Donovan leaned forward, resting both hands flat against the mahogany table. He looked directly at Trent, pinning my brother beneath a gaze of absolute zero. "When my firm finalized this lending agreement, we specifically designated the architect of your digital logistics grid as key personnel." Donovan explained, his voice ringing with lethal clarity. "Her continued employment was a mandatory condition of the loan. You fired the lead supply chain strategist via text message without consulting us. You severed the very talent keeping this company afloat, and you did it mere hours before executing the agreement. By terminating Jocelyn, you breached the core covenant." Trent shook his head frantically. "You cannot do that. You cannot call in a $50 million loan over a technicality." Donovan straightened up, adjusting his silk cuffs with agonizing slowness. "It is not a $50 million loan anymore, Trent. The bridge loan you signed contained a standard cross-default provision. When you defaulted on our contract, you automatically defaulted on every other corporate debt instrument Apex Freight currently holds. We spent the weekend quietly purchasing your entire existing debt portfolio from your secondary lenders." The room began to spin around my family. The sheer scale of the ambush was finally settling over them. "The $200 million debt is now due in full immediately," Donovan stated, delivering the final fatal blow. "Pinnacle Capital is calling in the entire balance. You have 24 hours to produce $200 million in liquid cash, or we will seize your assets, liquidate the trucks, and dissolve the holding company." "Apex Freight belongs to me." Warren turned completely purple. The blood vessels in his neck bulged against his collar. He surged out of his executive chair, his massive frame shaking with volcanic rage. He lunged across the space separating him from his son. "You absolute imbecile!" Warren screamed, the sound tearing through the boardroom like a physical assault. "You arrogant, stupid, worthless amateur. You handed them the keys to my company. You signed away everything I built because you were too lazy to read a contract. I trusted you to manage one crisis, and you bankrupted the entire family in a single afternoon." Trent cowered back in his chair, throwing his hands up to shield his face. "Dad, wait, I can fix this. I can negotiate with them." "You cannot fix anything!" Warren roared, his spittle flying across the polished wood. "You are a liability. You are a complete and total failure." Warren turned away from his trembling son, his chest heaving as he fought to breathe. The arrogant patriarch who had demanded my surrender just 5 minutes ago was entirely gone. He looked at Donovan, then he looked at me, realizing with terrifying clarity that I was standing safely behind the shield of a Wall Street titan. The power dynamic had violently inverted. Warren gripped the edge of the conference table, his knuckles turning white. His voice dropped, the booming authority replaced by a desperate, frantic tremor. Mr. Montgomery Warren begged, his eyes wide and pleading. "Please, we can restructure this. We can find a compromise." I had no idea my son agreed to these terms. He acted entirely outside the scope of his authority. "I will correct this right now. I will fire Trent on the spot. Just give me a chance to save my company." I stepped out from behind the imposing shadow of my husband. For my entire life, I had watched Warren discard people the moment they ceased to be useful to his bottom line. He discarded my childhood. He discarded my dignity. He discarded my value as a human being. Now trapped in a corner of his own making, he was ready to discard his golden boy without a single second of hesitation. I reached into the tailored pocket of my blazer and pulled out a small silver flash drive. I held it up between my thumb and forefinger, letting the cold morning light catch its metallic casing. "Firing Trent will not save you, Warren," I said. My voice echoed with a cold, terrifying calm in the cavernous boardroom. "Firing Trent will only accelerate the inevitable. Because Trent did not just make a bad business decision. Trent committed a federal crime." Trent's face, already pale from Donovan's corporate ambush, drained of its remaining color. He stared at the silver flash drive as if I were holding a live grenade. He shrank back into his chair, trying to make himself physically smaller. "What are you talking about?" Warren demanded, his voice dropping to a gravelly, uncertain rasp. "What is on that drive, Jocelyn?" I walked slowly toward the center of the conference table. Every eye in the room tracked my movement. "This is a complete, unredacted clone of the secondary accounting servers," I explained, savoring the absolute suffocating silence that had fallen over my family. Donovan intercepted Jamal trying to steal this exact data from our living room 2 days ago. Jamal was incredibly desperate to delete these logs. He was desperate because these logs show exactly why Apex Freight was suddenly starved for cash long before my algorithm was ever pulled offline. Jamal sank lower in his chair, his eyes darting frantically toward the boardroom exit. Chelsea turned to look at her husband, her brow furrowed in genuine, unscripted confusion. "Trent embezzled $4 million from the company pension fund and the offshore operating accounts over the last 18 months, I stated. My words hit the polished mahogany table like a gavel. He funneled the capital through untraceable shell companies to cover his own massive private gambling debts and failed personal investments. He bled the company dry from the inside out." "Liar," Trent shouted. His voice cracked violently, betraying his absolute panic. "She is lying, Dad. She manufactured those logs. She manipulated the code. She is just trying to destroy me because she is jealous." I did not even look at him. I kept my gaze locked entirely on Warren. "He needed $4 million, Warren. He stole it directly from your accounts. But Trent does not understand the digital infrastructure well enough to hide that kind of massive financial hemorrhage. He needed someone with deep administrative access to alter the internal audits. He needed someone to falsify the quarterly server reports. He needed Jamal." Chelsea gasped. It was a sharp, ragged intake of breath that cut through the heavy air of the room. She shoved her chair back violently, creating physical distance between herself and the man sitting next to her. "You helped him," Chelsea demanded. Her voice rose in shrill, unrestrained panic. "You helped him steal from my father. You risked our entire life for Trent." Jamal held up his hands defensively, sweat pouring down his temples. "Chelsea, baby, listen to me. Trent promised he would pay it back before the end of the fiscal year. He swore he had a sure thing. He said it was just a temporary float. He paid me a consulting fee to mask the routing numbers in the system. I did not know it was $4 million. I swear I did not know the total amount." "You absolute idiot," Trent hissed, burying his face in his hands. "You just confessed." The boardroom descended into a state of absolute chaotic fracture. Chelsea was screaming at Jamal, slapping his shoulder as he tried to grab her hands to calm her down. Beverly was clutching her chest, her mouth opening and closing in silent theatrical shock as she watched her perfect family spontaneously combust. But I was only watching Warren, the patriarch of the family, the man who had demanded my absolute obedience for 3 decades. He was doing the math in his head. He was calculating the fallout of a $200 million default, colliding directly with a massive federal embezzlement investigation. When the auditors from Pinnacle Capital ripped open the books to liquidate the assets, they would find the missing $4 million. They would trace the wire transfers. Bankruptcy is a corporate failure, Warren, I said quietly. My voice cut through the shouting, instantly silencing the room. The family deferred to the new power dynamic automatically. Bankruptcy means you lose your trucks. Bankruptcy means you lose your building. Bankruptcy means you lose your ego. But embezzlement fraud, falsifying financial records to secure a $50 million venture debt loan, that is a federal indictment. That is federal prison. You are the chief executive officer. You signed the fiduciary declarations. The SEC will hold you personally responsible for the missing capital. Warren looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. His broad shoulders completely collapsed. His hands shook against the mahogany table. He looked at Trent, his eyes completely hollow, stripped of all their former arrogance and cruelty. "You destroyed us," Warren whispered to his son. "You destroyed our legacy. You destroyed everything." Warren turned his defeated, desperate eyes back to me. He looked at the thick-bound legal folder Trent had thrown at me earlier, the intellectual property surrender document they had expected me to sign like an obedient, beaten dog. "Jocelyn," Warren pleaded. His voice broke, sounding weak and pathetic. "Please. You are my daughter. We are family. There has to be a way to fix this. There has to be a way to keep this out of the courts. What do you want? Name your price. I will give you anything." I looked down at the surrender document. I remembered the 10 years of unpaid overtime. I remembered the holidays spent patching servers while they drank champagne. I remembered the relentless, casual cruelty. I remembered my mother recording a video calling me a thief to the entire world. I remembered the absolute systematic destruction of my self-worth. "Family is a word you only use when you are out of ammunition," I replied. I reached down and picked up the heavy legal binder containing my forced surrender. I gripped the thick stack of paper and tore it straight down the middle. The sharp tearing sound was deafening in the quiet room. I dropped the shredded halves of their victory directly onto the polished wood. I reached into my blazer and pulled out a single crisp document. I slapped it down onto the table right over the ruins of their contract. "This is a total asset relinquishment," I stated. "You will sign over 100% of the voting shares of Apex Freight to me effectively immediately. You will vacate this building by noon. You will walk away with nothing, or you will walk into a federal courtroom. Choose." Warren stared at the single sheet of paper as if it were coated in poison. His massive hands, usually so steady and imposing, trembled against the polished mahogany table. His chest heaved with ragged, uneven breaths. The great Warren, the untouchable titan of industry, was finally backed into a corner with no exits, no loopholes, and no scapegoats left to sacrifice. He looked at Trent, the golden boy who had just handed me his empire. Trent was sobbing quietly, his face buried in his hands, completely shattered by the weight of his own profound incompetence. "You cannot pay the $200 million, Warren," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I felt a strange, profound sense of peace settling over me. "You do not have the liquidity, you do not have the collateral, you do not even have the goodwill of the industry anymore. Because of your son, Pinnacle Capital is legally executing a total asset seizure. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the holding accounts were frozen. As of 10 o'clock, the operational licenses were suspended. As of this exact second, Apex Freight no longer belongs to you." Beverly finally found her voice, her shrill tone cutting through the heavy silence of the boardroom. "You cannot just steal a company, Jocelyn." My mother stood up, her designer tennis outfit suddenly looking entirely ridiculous in the face of corporate warfare. "We will call the police. We will call the governor. We have friends in high places who will not let a struggling IT worker steal our legacy." I am not stealing anything, Mother, I replied softly. I am purchasing it. I looked at Donovan. My husband gave a single affirming nod, his glacial eyes locked on my family with predatory satisfaction. Last night, I registered a private limited liability corporation under my own name. I explained, enunciating every word clearly. Early this morning, Pinnacle Capital, acting as the primary debt holder of a defaulted company, seized the entirety of Apex Freight's physical assets. 10 minutes later, Pinnacle Capital signed an exclusive multi-million-dollar intellectual property and operational licensing agreement directly with my new LLC. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the mahogany table. I wanted them to understand the absolute finality of their defeat. I wanted the reality to sink into their bones. The physical servers in the basement are mine. The routing algorithms calculating the manifests are mine. The 500 semi-trucks currently driving across the Midwest are mine. The building we are currently sitting in is mine. The legacy you valued more than your own daughter is mine. They did not understand. They could not understand. They refused to understand. Jamal was sweating profusely, his eyes darting toward the heavy wooden doors, clearly calculating how fast he could run before federal agents arrived. Chelsea was weeping openly, her mascara running down her cheeks. She was mourning the loss of her trust fund, her elite status, and her country club memberships. They had built their entire identities on Warren's wealth, and now that wealth was evaporating into thin air. "You will fail," Warren hissed, venom dripping from his words. He was clinging to his arrogance like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. "You have no idea how to manage an operation of this scale. You are a code monkey, Jocelyn. You lack the killer instinct. The board of directors will revolt. The shareholders will file injunctions. You will drive this company into the ground within 6 months, and I will be right here to buy it back for pennies." "There is no board of directors anymore," Donovan stated. His deep voice resonated through the room, commanding absolute, terrifying silence. Donovan stepped forward, moving with the ruthless authority of a man who dismantled empires before breakfast. "There are no shareholders to file injunctions?" Donovan continued, his gaze pinning Warren to his chair. "Apex Freight is now a privately held subsidiary, and my wife is the sole proprietor. Your threats are completely empty, Warren. You are a disgraced bankrupt executive facing a massive federal fraud investigation. You have exactly zero leverage." Donovan buttoned the center button of his midnight blue Tom Ford suit. He stood tall, radiating power, looking down at the broken patriarch. Then he shifted his icy gaze to Trent. "As the managing director of Pinnacle Capital and the executing authority of your defaulted debt, I am stepping in to handle the final administrative cleanup of this acquisition," Donovan announced. His tone was surgical, precise, and completely devoid of mercy. "Warren, Trent, stand up." Neither man moved. They were frozen in shock, their minds unable to process receiving orders in their own boardroom. Donovan's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I said stand up." Slowly, painfully, the former CEO and the disgraced Golden Boy pushed themselves out of their leather executive chairs. They looked incredibly small, diminished, completely stripped of the power they had wielded like a weapon against me for so long. "You are both formally terminated from your positions at Apex Freight, effective immediately," Donovan declared, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "And because this termination is the direct result of documented corporate fraud, catastrophic financial mismanagement, and federal embezzlement, you are being fired for cause." Trent gasped, his head snapping up, his tear-stained face twisting in horror. "For cause," Trent stammered, his voice climbing into a desperate whine. "But my contract, my severance package, my stock options." "Evaporated," Donovan replied coldly, slamming the door shut on their last shred of hope. "Terminations for cause legally void all golden parachutes, all severance agreements, and all deferred compensation packages. You get absolutely nothing. You do not get a pension. You do not get a payout. You do not even get to keep your company cars." The silence following Donovan's declaration stretched until it snapped. The reality of those words, no pension, no payout, no company cars, acted as a detonator. The polished facade of the boardroom shattered, revealing the absolute rot beneath the surface of my family. Beverly was the first to break. The matriarch who had spent 3 decades meticulously curating her image as a premier logistics socialite let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. She spun toward Warren, her manicured hands curling into claws. "You told me Trent had this under control," Beverly screamed. Her voice echoed off the acoustic paneling, shrill and unhinged. "You looked me in the eye this morning and promised me the transition would be seamless. You said Jocelyn would sign the papers and we would retain our absolute majority. My trust fund is tied up in this holding company, Warren. The summer house is leveraged against this firm." Warren tried to reach for her, his hands trembling. "Beverly, please keep your voice down. We will call our private attorneys. We will file an emergency injunction." "With what money?" Beverly shrieked, swatting his hands away as if his touch burned her. "Did you not just hear the man? Pinnacle Capital froze the accounts. They bought the debt. Your golden boy son embezzled $4 million and lost the entire empire in a single weekend. My country club fees are due next week. The mortgage on the main estate is due. You have bankrupted us, you arrogant, blind, pathetic old man. You let this idiot drive us straight off a cliff because you were too proud to pay your own daughter a fair wage." Warren recoiled, physically struck by the venom from his wife. The united front they had presented to the world for 30 years dissolved in seconds. Across the room, the contagion of panic infected my sister. Chelsea had been staring blankly at the shredded surrender document on the table. Her brain finally completed the horrifying calculus of Jamal's confession. She slowly turned her head toward her husband. Jamal was still sweating, his eyes darting frantically around the room, looking for a corporate lifeline that did not exist. Chelsea grabbed the lapels of Jamal's expensive suit, yanking him forward with surprising strength. "You helped him steal $4 million, Chelsea demanded, her voice dropping into a lethal shaking register. Jamal put his hands up defensively, trying to pry her fingers off his jacket. "Chelsea, baby, listen. Trent said it was an internal float. He said the board would never notice the variance if I just routed it through the ghost accounts for 1 quarter. He promised me a massive bonus for the administrative oversight." "You risked our house for a bonus!" Chelsea roared, abandoning all pretense of volume control. "You risked federal prison." "The house is in your name, Jamal. If the SEC audits those ghost accounts, they will seize our assets to cover the damages. They will take the house. They will take the kids' college funds. They will take the cars." Chelsea shoved him backward hard against his leather chair. "I married a regional director, Jamal. I did not marry a felon. You let my idiot brother drag you into a federal embezzlement scheme because you wanted to play the big shot at the country club. You are going to jail. You are going to prison, and I'm going to have to move back into a rental apartment. I will divorce you before the ink dries on your indictment." Jamal blanched his mouth, opening and closing soundlessly. The rats were not just fleeing the sinking ship. They were actively tearing each other to pieces on the deck. But Trent was the most dangerous rat left in the room. He had listened to his mother disown his father. He had listened to his sister declare war on his accomplice. He looked at the silver flash drive still resting on the mahogany table. It was the physical manifestation of his utter destruction. He looked at me standing calmly next to Donovan, untouched by the hurricane of panic sweeping through the room. The realization that I had orchestrated his complete annihilation finally overrode his cowardly instincts. His fear mutated into blind, primal rage. "You worthless little snake," Trent snarled. His eyes bulged, the veins in his neck straining against his collar. "You set me up. You flagged those servers on purpose so they would find the ghost accounts. You planned this entire ambush just to steal my company." "It was never your company, Trent," I replied, my voice slicing through his hysteria with surgical precision. "You were just the parasite feeding off the host. I am the cure." Trent let out a guttural roar. He lunged across the wide mahogany table, his arms outstretched, his fingers hooked like claws aiming directly for my throat. He did not care about the federal agents anymore. He did not care about the bankruptcy. He only wanted to physically destroy the woman who had stripped him of his unearned crown. I did not even flinch. I did not step back. Before Trent's knees even cleared the edge of the conference table, the heavy double doors of the boardroom violently burst open. Donovan's private security detail, two massive men in dark suits who had been stationed silently in the corridor, moved with terrifying speed. One of them caught Trent mid-lunge, gripping my brother by the back of his tailored suit jacket and yanking him backward with enough force to lift him entirely off the floor. The second guard stepped in seamlessly, slamming Trent shoulder first into the heavy oak wall paneling. The impact rattled the framed portraits of Warren's corporate achievements hanging nearby. Trent gasped for air as the guard pinned his arm forcefully against his back, pressing his face flat against the expensive wood. "Do not move a single muscle," the security contractor commanded in a low, gravelly voice. Donovan casually adjusted his cuffs, watching my brother squirm against the wall. "If you ever attempt to move aggressively toward my wife again, Trent, I will not let security handle it. I will handle it myself. And I assure you, my methods are significantly less restrained." Trent whimpered, his cheek mashed against the paneling, utterly defeated and physically broken. The sheer violence of the takedown snapped whatever remaining resolve Jamal possessed. He stared at Trent pinned to the wall, then looked at the cold, calculating expression on Donovan's face. Jamal realized the game was entirely over. The old regime was dead. Warren was a ghost. Trent was a liability. Chelsea was preparing divorce papers. Jamal dropped entirely to his knees. The sound of his kneecaps hitting the carpeted floor echoed loudly in the stunned silence of the room. He ignored his wife's horrified gasp. He ignored his father-in-law's disgusted glare. He crawled forward on the floor, stopping 2 feet away from where I stood. "Jocelyn, please," Jamal begged, his voice cracking with absolute pathetic desperation. He clasped his hands together, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Please, I was just following orders." Trent made me do it. He was the VP of operations. I had to follow the chain of command. I have 2 kids. I have a mortgage. Please do not give that flash drive to the SEC. Please do not fire me. I will do whatever you want. I will work for half my salary. Just let me keep my regional manager job. Please, Jocelyn, I am begging you." I looked down at the man kneeling on the carpet. Jamal was shaking his breath, coming in short, panicked gasps that visibly vibrated his chest. The expensive tailored fabric of his jacket bunched awkwardly around his shoulders as he groveled. He looked pathetic. He looked incredibly, impossibly small. Just 3 days ago, this same man had stood in my cramped living room exuding a toxic, suffocating arrogance. 3 days ago, he had laughed in my face. I tilted my head, studying him with absolute clinical detachment. "Do you remember the advice you gave me, Jamal?" I asked. My voice was quiet, forcing him to strain to hear it over his own frantic breathing. "Do you remember standing in my home mocking the cut of my husband's suit? Do you remember telling me that some people are born to be stepping stones, and that I just needed to accept my place beneath your feet?" Jamal swallowed hard, his eyes wide and pleading. "Jocelyn, I was joking. It was just stupid corporate banter. You know how the culture is here. I was just playing the game. I never meant it. I have a family to support. I never played the game," I replied coldly. "I built the board you were playing on, and now I am flipping it over. You are fired, Jamal. You are fired without severance. You are fired without a reference. Get off your knees and get out of my building." Jamal opened his mouth to argue, but Donovan simply snapped his fingers. The second security guard immediately stepped forward, grabbing Jamal by the collar and hoisting him to his feet like a misbehaving child. Jamal stumbled, his expensive shoes slipping on the carpet as he was shoved roughly toward the boardroom doors. "Jocelyn, please." The sudden shrill cry came from the corner of the room. Beverly surged forward, pushing past a paralyzed Warren. My mother threw herself across the space, her designer tennis skirt swishing around her legs. She stopped just inches from me, her face contorted into a mask of pure, desperate maternal anguish. Genuine tears were finally streaming down her perfectly contoured cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. She reached out with trembling, manicured hands, attempting to grab my forearms. I took a single, deliberate step backward. Her hands grasped empty air. "Jocelyn, my beautiful girl." Beverly wept, her voice cracking with manufactured heartbreak. You cannot do this. We are your family. I am your mother. I carried you. I raised you. You are my flesh and blood. You are punishing us for a few simple misunderstandings. We can go to counseling. We can go to family therapy. Just do not throw us out on the street. Do not take away the only life we know. You have a good heart, Jocelyn. You have always been my sweet, forgiving girl. Please, remember who we are? I stared at the woman who had birthed me. I searched her crying face for a single shred of genuine love, a single ounce of actual remorse. There was nothing. There was only raw, unfiltered terror at the prospect of losing her wealth. I remembered her standing in her massive kitchen telling me I was a disappointment. I remembered her recording a video for the company attorneys, explicitly accusing me of corporate theft to save Trent's reputation. I remembered every single time she looked the other way, while Warren and Trent tore my self-esteem to shreds. You traded me for a country club membership years ago, I stated. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Beverly gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Jocelyn, no! You traded my childhood for Warren's approval. I continued, my voice rising in volume, echoing against the mahogany walls. You traded my dignity to protect Trent's fragile ego. You traded your role as a mother for a luxury SUV and a vacation home. You watched them break me down year after year, and you handed them the hammer. You chose your lifestyle over your daughter. You made that choice every single day for 30 years. I took a step forward, forcing her to shrink back. I am not your sweet, forgiving girl, I said, delivering the final fatal truth. And you are no longer my mother. You are just a bankrupt woman trespassing in my corporate headquarters. Beverly let out a strangled sob, burying her face in her hands as her knees buckled. She sank into a chair, completely shattered, mourning the death of her bank accounts disguised as the loss of a daughter. I turned to Donovan. He signaled the security detail standing by the heavy wooden doors. The guard stepped out into the hallway for a brief second and returned carrying a stack of flattened cardboard boxes. With practiced, humiliating efficiency, the guards popped the boxes open, taping the bottom shut with loud, echoing rips of packing tape. They tossed one empty cardboard box onto the center of the conference table right in front of Warren. They tossed another at Trent's feet. They tossed a third toward Jamal. You have exactly 5 minutes to pack any personal photographs or medical items from your executive suites. Donovan commanded, his voice devoid of any emotion. You will not touch a single computer. You will not take a single proprietary document. You will not take company cell phones or corporate credit cards. If you attempt to access the network, my security team will physically restrain you and hold you for the authorities. Warren stared at the cheap, brown cardboard box resting on his expensive mahogany table. It was the ultimate symbol of the working class indignity he had spent his entire life running away from. His jaw worked silently. He reached out with trembling, liver-spotted hands and pulled the box toward his chest. Trent was still pinned against the wall by the guard. The security contractor finally released his grip, shoving Trent forward. Trent stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the table. He grabbed his cardboard box, his shoulders heaving with silent, pathetic sobs. "Move," the lead guard barked. The procession of defeat began. Donovan and I stood side by side in the boardroom, watching as the security detail marched my family out of the executive suite. Warren walked first, his head bowed, clutching his empty cardboard box to his chest like a shield. Beverly followed, leaning heavily on Warren's arm, her face hidden behind her hands. Trent dragged his feet, his eyes glued to the floor. Jamal walked last, his shoulders slumped, completely broken by his wife's rejection and his own impending legal doom. They walked out into the main administrative hallway. The entire corporate floor had gone completely silent. Dozens of employees, the very people Warren had terrorized and Trent had exploited, stood at their cubicles and office doors. They watched in absolute stunned silence as the untouchable, tyrannical family was marched toward the exit by private security. Nobody offered a word of sympathy. Nobody looked away. The employees watched the empire fall in real time. The security guards corralled Warren, Beverly, Trent, and Jamal into the waiting executive elevator. the same elevator they had exclusively used to look down on the rest of the building. The guards pressed the button for the lobby and stepped back. I walked forward, standing just outside the elevator threshold. I looked at the four of them huddled inside the steel carriage. They were completely stripped of their wealth. They were completely stripped of their status. They were completely stripped of their dignity. The heavy steel doors began to slide shut, sealing them inside the descending box, officially dropping them out of my world forever. The silence inside the executive suite was absolute. It was the heavy, settling quiet that follows a natural disaster. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape entirely transformed. 1 week had passed since the boardroom massacre. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corner office, the very office Warren had occupied for 3 decades. The heavy mahogany desk had been hauled out and replaced with a sleek, minimalist glass table. The dark wood paneling, saturated with years of cigar smoke and toxic masculinity, was being stripped away, soon to be replaced with bright modern fixtures. The oppressive atmosphere of Apex Freight was gone. The company had been formally rebranded as Meridian Logistics. I held a mug of black coffee, watching the morning traffic crawl along the highway below. The fallout had been swift, brutal, and entirely public. Trent was arrested by federal agents 2 days after the boardroom confrontation. The SEC auditors did not need to dig very deep to find the massive, gaping wound in the company pension fund. The $4 million he had embezzled to cover his gambling debts was gone, vanished into offshore accounts and failed crypto schemes. He was currently sitting in a holding cell awaiting an arraignment hearing that his court-appointed public defender was entirely unprepared for. Warren had tried to leverage his country club connections to post Trent's bail, only to discover that those connections had mysteriously evaporated the moment his net worth hit zero. Warren himself was currently navigating the humiliating labyrinth of personal bankruptcy. Because he had signed the fiduciary declarations for Apex Freight, the SEC held him personally liable for the corporate negligence that allowed Trent's embezzlement to occur. The sprawling family estate in the suburbs was being seized. His vintage car collection was being auctioned off. He had moved into a small rented condominium, a reality that Beverly had loudly and publicly refused to accept. My mother had packed 3 designer suitcases and moved into a boutique hotel downtown, leaving Warren to face the financial ruin alone. She had spent the last week desperately calling distant relatives and former socialite friends, trying to secure a loan to maintain her lifestyle. Nobody returned her calls. The toxic ecosystem she had spent her life cultivating had collapsed the moment the money ran dry. Chelsea, true to her word, had filed for divorce from Jamal less than 24 hours after the boardroom incident. She had immediately tried to position herself as the unsuspecting victim of a criminal conspiracy, claiming she had absolutely no knowledge of Jamal's involvement in Trent's embezzlement. It did not matter. Because the house was in Jamal's name and the ghost accounts were tied directly to his administrative credentials, the federal government had placed a lien on all their shared assets. Chelsea was currently living in a rented townhouse, screaming at her divorce attorney over speakerphone about the injustice of a frozen bank account. Jamal, terrified of federal prison, had immediately cut a deal with the prosecution, offering to testify against Trent in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was currently working a minimum-wage retail job at a big-box electronics store, wearing a polyester polo shirt and a name tag, trying to scrape together enough cash to pay his mounting legal fees. They had all built their lives on a foundation of entitlement and casual cruelty. When the foundation was ripped away, they had nothing left but their own profound incompetence. The heavy glass door to the corner office opened smoothly. Donovan walked in carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a thick stack of finalized transition documents. He looked sharp, relaxed, and completely at ease in the space. He set the documents down on the glass desk and handed me the coffee. "The final transfer papers from the SEC just cleared," Donovan said, his deep voice carrying a quiet satisfaction. "The liquidation of Apex Freight is legally complete. Meridian Logistics now officially owns every single physical and digital asset, free and clear. The new routing algorithm you deployed yesterday has already increased fleet efficiency by 14%. I took a sip of the coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest. "How is the staff adjusting?" I asked, turning away from the window to look at my husband. "Relieved," Donovan replied, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Morale has skyrocketed since Warren and Trent were removed from the premises. The development team is thrilled to actually have a CEO who understands the code they are writing. We have already rehired the 3 senior analysts Trent fired last month to cut costs." I nodded, feeling a profound sense of closure. For years, I had believed that I was the problem. I had believed my family when they told me I was difficult, ungrateful, and a disappointment. I had let them define my worth based on their own toxic transactional metrics. I had spent my entire life trying to be seen by people who were willfully blind. "You did it, Jocelyn," Donovan said softly, stepping closer and wrapping his arms around my waist. He rested his chin on my shoulder, looking out at the city skyline with me. "You did not just survive them, you dismantled them." I leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid, unwavering support that had been my anchor through the entire ordeal. "I did not just take the company," I murmured, watching a fleet of Meridian Logistics trucks merge onto the highway, their new silver logos gleaming in the morning sun. I took my life back. Warren had built an empire by demanding absolute loyalty and punishing any sign of independence. He had expected me to be a quiet, obedient stepping stone, a convenient tool to be utilized and discarded at his whim. He had underestimated my intelligence. He had underestimated my patience. But most importantly, he had underestimated my absolute refusal to be a victim in my own story. I had not just secured my career. I had executed the ultimate corporate trap, leveraging their own greed, arrogance, and incompetence against them. I had watched them destroy themselves, and I had built a new empire on the ashes of their failure. I took another sip of coffee, the bitter taste completely gone, replaced by the sweet, undeniable flavor of absolute victory. The most powerful lesson from this story is that your true worth is never defined by those who blindly underestimate you, even if they are your family members. For years, the protagonist endured toxic behavior, casual cruelty, and absolute dismissal of her talents. Instead of loudly seeking their validation or crumbling under pressure, she chose quiet, calculated resilience. She built her own unshakable foundation while they carelessly destroyed theirs. Ultimately, the narrative teaches us that establishing fierce boundaries and achieving independent success is the ultimate justice. You do not owe loyalty to people who view you as a stepping stone.